morning, Britain. You've just been listening and watching to a memorial service at St Paul's Cathedral in memory of those who lost their lives on the 7th of July 2005.
Yes, of course, 20 years today since those devastating terrorist attacks in central London on the transport system, on tubes and on buses.
Yes, 52 people died, almost 800 injured when 4 terrorists detonated bombs on the London Underground and on a double-decker bus.
Well, our Home and Security editor Mark White has taken a personal look back at the tragedy that he lived through and reported on. An atrocity that marked the first use of suicide bombings in Britain.
Something's gone badly wrong. We really don't know at the moment. It's loud bangs.
We need ambulances and water to King's Cross.
I understand what you're saying.
And Russell Square.
Russell Square is priority. We're going to have it as a major incident, so we'll get ambulances to you wherever I can.
Okay, thanks, mate.
An attack in the heart of our capital city. The London bombings were designed to strike commuters at the height of rush hour. 3 underground trains and a bus were the targets. But as shocking as this mass casualty attack was, it also marked a sinister turn in the threat Britain now faced. The first suicide bombings in this country. So many people here in London and far beyond have stories to tell about the horrors of 7/7. For me, it was quite literally the day Islamist terrorism landed on my doorstep. Around the time of 7/7, I was living in this apartment block. That iconic red double-decker bus blew up just yards further up the road there. And Russell Square, another blast site, is just across the road. It was a Piccadilly line train between King's Cross and Russell Square which saw the greatest loss of life. 26 died here.
I'm the supervisor at Aldgate. We've just had a big explosion. There appears to be something ahead of the train in the track.
There may be fatalities. We don't know anything about that.
Another 7 were killed near Aldgate Station in East London. 6 died at Edgware Road Station in West London. And 13 lost their lives when a double-decker bus was blown up at Tavistock Square, just yards from the site of the blast at Russell Square. Russell Square was my local tube station. On 7/7, I was fortunate to be on a day off. Otherwise, around the time of the bombing, I'd have been right here trying to catch a westbound Piccadilly line train. So many of us feel fortunate that fate intervened that day. But as well as the 52 who died, almost 800 were injured, and thousands of others will never forget what they saw. I ended up reporting live from the roof of my apartment building as the full horror of those events unfolded.
Looking down onto Russell Square, high up on a rooftop here, looking down onto Russell Square tube station at the moment. There's a row of about 20 ambulances immediately outside the tube station. Also, fire rescue vehicles, firefighters are down in Russell Square tube station itself. There are numerous, what are obviously doctors in these familiar orange boiler suits as well, either going down into the tunnel or emerging with casualties.
Those were murderous attacks on London, on our city, that affected so many people so deeply. I think it's really important 20 years on that our focus is on all of those people affected. The other thing my mind turns to are the emergency services and others who stepped forward on that day, and they and the families and the victims. What strikes me is how they're still carrying the effects of that day through to today and for the rest of their lives.
As well as the first suicide bombings, 7/7 marked the advent for the UK of more sophisticated terror cells aimed at causing so-called spectacular attacks. 2 decades on, the UK's most senior counter-terrorism officer says the threat picture has mostly moved away from the more sophisticated plots to an era of lone wolf attacks, individuals still willing to die for their twisted ideology and still looking to cause maximum harm.
So we still see the Islamist threat as our main threat here in the United Kingdom. And with an ever-increasing and unstable world as well, we do see terrorist groups overseas beginning to have an influence on terrorism threats in near Europe and of course here in the UK. So Islamists remains our main threat. And I think the online environment, the world environment, adds a whole new layer of challenge to the threat that we face.
I know it sounds a bit like a cliche, but I honestly can't believe that 20 years have passed since the horrors of the London bombings. A day when the 52 innocent lives represented here were so murderously cut short, and the lives of so many others forever changed. Mark White, GB News at the 7/7 Memorial.
Well, thanks very much to Mark White for that reminder, that look back over that day in London just 20 years ago. Well, we can speak to Mark White now. He's there outside St Paul's Cathedral, where a memorial service is taking place this afternoon. Mark, incredibly poignant to look back on that day. I think everyone can look back and remember where they were when it happened. But I suppose the question now moves onwards to the state of security in this country as things stand. That, of course, was the first suicide bombing that Britain had seen, but it wasn't the last.
No, it really marked an era of these so-called spectaculars, these sophisticated plots that involved multiple people taking instruction and often training in places like Pakistan and Afghanistan, associated, of course, at that time through Al-Qaeda. But then we had, of course, George Bush's so-called war on terror that went after and largely dismantled Al-Qaeda for a time. Al-Qaeda is now sort of picking up strength again. And then after Al-Qaeda, we had a whole new terrorist ideology through ISIS, or the Islamic State. And that changed the approach towards terrorist attacks. It told its followers, you don't have to plot, you don't have to come up with these spectacular terrorist attacks. You can get behind the wheel of a vehicle, you can take a knife from your kitchen drawer, and you can go out and you can still cause untold harm. And we saw many attacks like that during the period that ISIS was resurgent, at a point where attacks, in particular in 2017, we saw multiple attacks here in London, at Westminster, on Westminster Bridge, and then, of course, the killing of that police officer at the Houses of Parliament. We also saw the London Bridge bombing, when 3 terrorists ran over people on London Bridge, then went on a stabbing spree in Borough Market itself. We saw other attacks that took place both in London and in Manchester. That year was the year in which the Ariana Grande concert was attacked by a lone wolf, but a suicide bomber who had also made a homemade device that killed so many and injured many, many others. So the terrorist threat is still there, and particularly now, the police and security services warn that we are in an era again where international crises are impacting the terrorist threat. We're talking, of course, about the likes of the war in Gaza, the war that's taken place in Iran and elsewhere in the Middle East. All of that feeds in to international terrorism and those here in the UK that would carry out attacks in the name of whatever the twisted ideology coming out of the Middle East or what other part of the world that particular group might belong to. 250 almost arrests were made last year alone. That was a 5-year high in terms of the number of terrorist-related arrests. And so the police say, they warn, we are in a very unsettled picture. The predominant threat remains Islamist terrorism. 75% of the caseload that MI5 deals with is Islamist-related terrorism.
OK, well, Mark White, thank you so much. Our Home Security Editor will speak to you a little bit later on. There's Mark White outside St Paul's Cathedral. Right now, we'll speak to the security expert, Professor Anthony Glees, for more on this. Professor Anthony, thank you very much. We hear a lot, don't we, from, not least from His Majesty the King Charles and our Prime Minister, how after these dreadful events we see the best of humanity, how we must look to unite the country rather than divide, not allow these types of terror attacks to divide us any further. But do you think that we have become more comfortable, or at least our politicians have become more comfortable in calling a spade, calling this out for what it is, Islamist terrorism?
Well, that's a very good question. Of course, we don't want to be divided, and I believe the British people aren't divided at all about this. I think what 7/7 showed, and I remember it, very, very clearly indeed. And indeed, I had a colleague, Professor John Tulloch at Brunel University, where I was a professor at that time, who was caught up in the Edgware Road attack, and he described the absolute horror. He survived because he had a suitcase with a laptop on it, on his lap. And he described, seeing the tube expand noiselessly. And he thought, what on earth is going on? And then the next minute, there was the most almighty bang. He thought he was dead. Luckily, he wasn't. But it traumatized him, I think, for the rest of his professional career. So we were all united. I think we are still united. And I don't think this is necessarily a celebration, or should be a celebration of diversity. I think it should be an understanding that we have to be united, that we have a right to be kept secure. 7/7, unfortunately, was a serious intelligence failure, and it had to be called out. It was called out, and I think we're a great deal safer today. We have a MI5 and counter-terrorist police that are second to none in the world. And as you know, over 40 late-stage Islamist terrorist plots have been detected since 2022. So the threat is still there, but we are very much better at countering it. The country is united, I think, in not wanting Islamist extremism in any form or guise to prosper, which is why, yesterday's, whatever it was, Palestine action demonstration.
But unfortunately, Anthony, we do have a homegrown problem, though, don't we? We do have a homegrown problem. So we're not completely united, are we?
Well, I think the vast majority of people are united. And I do think, just as 20 years ago, people like me were quick to distinguish between the vast majority of British Muslims who wanted nothing to do with Al-Qaeda and the small minority of Islamist terrorists. So again, today, I think we need to distinguish between the vast majority of British Muslims and the relatively small number of Islamists who stalk the United Kingdom. As I say, 43 late-stage terrorist plots. Yeah. But, let's celebrate the strength of MI5. The current Director General of MI5, Sir Ken McCallum, he's a very, very tough cookie. You'd be mad to want to mess with him or his men. He's clearly got the back of any MI5 officer who's risking
And so often
their
those
lives.
are the unsung operations. We all hear about the successful attacks, but for obvious reasons, we can't know about the operational detail of those that have been foiled. Anthony Glees, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you so much for joining us and talking through this important anniversary.
OK, well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. We've got lots more coming up for you today. So the Labour grandee, Lord Kinnock, he says the party should consider taxing the ultra-rich, a big fat wealth tax to raise billions. But is that the right thing to do? We're going to debate that.
Elsewhere, a mum found guilty of killing her in-laws with a poisoned beef Wellington. So what drove Erin Patterson to plan the deadly lunch?
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
You have a very nice accent, and I always thought but obviously I'm totally wrong. I've learned something already straight away.
I mean, we've interviewed together on countless occasions. I thought you would have picked up on my English accent.
Oh no, you're just changing it now. You're changing it a bit here.
Yeah, I'm just putting it on for you, mate.
Well, I'll tell you this, Chesney. I think it's amazing that we're talking about a tour next March for a man like you, and that shows you the extent to which you have to be organised to do these things. I thought like you're advertising this for this month or next month. Why the need to go so early?
Oh no, it's just to give people plenty of advance notice. You know, these days life comes up very fast, doesn't it? So I'm always touring, Eamon. I've actually got some headline shows coming up next week. I'm in Cardiff and and Southampton, but we've just announced this headline tour for next year. So I thought I'd get it out there and let people know in advance. You know.
And Chesney, just looking at your Instagram now, I mean, you've got a sense of humour, haven't you? Because you've been putting videos out there saying people think I'm a one-hit wonder, but let me tell you, there'll be a lot more songs than just the one that you're most famous for.
Yes. Contrary to popular belief, there are other songs. So looking forward, I've got a new album out right now, Ellie, and it's all been very, very well received. I'm so honoured and grateful for that. And so, yeah, I'll be performing some of this new album out on the road soon. You guys should come.
GB News, the People's Channel.
From the school run to the home run, watch a new show for all of Britain.
So he can say whatever he wants.
A straight-talking show where all voices are heard.
And, you know, when are we going to stop talking about smashing the gangs and actually do it?
With the stories that matter from every part of our country.
There's a bit of a crash landing there for your Chancellor.
Bold, fearless and standing up for you. That's me, Martin Daubney, 3 p.m. till 6 p.m, weekdays, here only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is now 28 minutes past midday, and the former Labour Party leader, Lord Kinnock, has called on the government to bring in a wealth tax to try and plug that black hole, claiming the public is fed up with the rich going unscathed, and such a tax could raise 10 billion quid.
Could. However, it is believed Downing Street will resist the idea, as the Prime Minister's most senior advisers warn that recent levies on the rich may already be undermining economic growth, and experts say a fresh tax might trigger a further exodus of the rich from Britain.
So is it time to whack that wealth tax on the rich? To debate this, we're joined by the former Labour spokesman, James Matthewson. James, this is an idea that keeps getting floated, but the government seems to be resisting it so far. Clearly, they worry it could be counterproductive.
They do. I get it. Look, the economic model that Rachel Reeves has built and the idea of kind of building economic credibility, becoming friends with private business, with private enterprise, with the city, this has all been the kind of plan of this economic model for the government. However, there's one problem here, and that's that this is a Labour government. It's run by the Labour Party. It's meant to be the representative for the Labour movement in politics. And it's kind of the antithesis of how Labour would normally do economics. And every Labour government throughout history since 1945 onwards been different in how they do that. But one core value that should be at the heart of that, which Neil Kinnock, which, let's be honest, he's hardly a radical lefty, he's known for smashing the left traditionally in the party, is now calling to try and get back to those roots. And that should be about redistribution of wealth.
There's a huge amount of redistribution of wealth, James. Also, we have a huge number of wealth taxes already, don't we? Well, at least 3 I can think of. We have capital gains tax, we have dividend taxes, we have, what else do we have? We have savings taxes, of course. We might lose some of the tax-free allowance with the cash ISAs and everything else. It's not as though we don't already tax the rich, is it? And I believe the top 10% or the top 1% are responsible for 30% of income tax.
They are, but they should be. But it's clearly not enough, is it? Because people are languishing in poverty whilst the rich are getting richer. We've got more millionaires than ever before. We've got more billionaires than ever before. Billionaires shouldn't even exist as a concept while you've got people in your country.
Why? Because you said so, James. Because you said so, James.
Because I believe so, Emily. Unfortunately, I do not believe that somebody should be able to hold so much wealth, and more wealth than they can ever spend in a lifetime, hoarded away, saved in investments, in bank accounts, where unfortunately it is not stimulating the economy. You know who does stimulate the economy?
Sorry.
The people who live on the likes of £30
James,
a
what do you
week
think happens
who are
to money
taking
when
out
it's
the
in a
shops.
bank account? Did you think it sits there like a sort of a vault of gold?
It's under his bed.
It's invested in businesses. That's what creates economic growth.
You know what banks do, James?
Do you know who really drives the economy in this country? It's normal working people who go out and spend money in the shops. They spend money at restaurants when they can. They spend money at the cinema when they can. The more money that they have in their pocket, the more the economy grows. That's how I believe in economics.
Do you know how people start a business, James? They go to the bank, don't they, to ask for some money to be able to be loaned that money, to be able to set up their business in the hope that they might make a profit. And then if they do make a profit, they might decide to open up another business, mightn't they?
Right.
And then they might, God forbid, start earning some money. And then what happens? The government come in and say, you know what, you're earning a little bit too much money, James, we're going to take it all away from you.
I'm not going to take it all away from you. What are we on about? We're talking here, Neil Kinnock has talked about a 2% tax on assets of £10 million or more. That's 200 grand. Sorry, you've still got £9,800,000 left.
But it's not a 2% tax, is it?
Whilst at the same
because if you have a 2%
time,
tax on a total asset rather than on an income, say someone has a 6% return on their assets each year, they've got it invested in whatever, that's already taxed. I think it might be a 30 or 40%. You add on an extra 2% to the 40% of the 6%, and do you see what I mean? We're getting close to, well, way more than half of their own. You're getting up to sort of 80% tax effective rate.
You're not getting up to 80% tax. It's an extra 2% increase.
No, you're not understanding what the 2% is on. Because the 2% is on the total wealth. So then on the income, that represents an 80% tax in many cases.
Tom, you have no issue arguing to reduce the welfare bill, right? To take people who get £30 a week from the state down to £28 a week from the state. Yet when it comes to somebody with a £10 million asset, we're suddenly bothered about the fact that, oh, boo-hoo, they might have to pay an extra 200 grand because it's immoral and it's unfair.
James, I think one of the important points here is that one of the important points here is that we don't have a global government. Maybe the world would be better if the UK still ran the entire world, but we don't. And here's the thing. People with assets of more than £10 million, and it actually would be more than £20 million who would be affected by this, because obviously husbands and wives would just divide their assets. I mean, people are clever when they come to taxes, which is why I think the £10 billion that is claimed to be raised, it's not true, because people change their behaviour and will move their assets around in ways like that. But these people are the most hypermobile people on the face of the planet. Most of them, in the hyper-rich category, even spend a minority of their time in the United Kingdom as it is. They'll have a place in Europe, they'll have a place in America, they'll have a place everywhere. And to reduce their time in the United Kingdom by a couple of months to get under that legal threshold that makes you tax liable, I mean, that's a very easy decision for these people to make.
Great. And unfortunately, this is the way the world works, right? It's not, we didn't make it like this. We didn't create it like this. The problem is, if people want to leave this country because, and they don't want to be, let's be honest, if they don't want to be patriots and pay into a system where we have an amazing healthcare system that provides universal healthcare at the point of free at the point of delivery, if they don't want to pay and contribute their worth towards those kind of things, do you know how much it affects someone to lose £5 a month from their benefits? Somebody who is scraping by. Do you think it really affects somebody who has an asset of £20 million to lose 400 grand? Of course,
James, the problem is that you're not looking at you're not actually looking at the practical consequences of these policies. You like the idea of it because you see rich people bad, poor people good. We need to have redistribution. We need to have a redistribution of wealth in this country to make everyone better off. Sounds absolutely lovely. In practice, what we're seeing currently is the mass exodus of wealth from this country, which means that you and I will be paying more tax. And it means that public services aren't going to do so well, doesn't it, James?
There is this constant fear-mongering. Do you know, since 1945, since that transformative Labour government, when the NHS was brought in, when the welfare state
taxes have
was
no
created,
impact on people's
and was
behaviour,
threatened. They constantly threatened that they would leave this country. Rich people constantly threatened they would leave this country. All right? Well, put your money where your mouth is. They shouldn't be basing their entire decision as to where they live.
It's not up to you to decide, though.
I'm sorry.
That's not James Mathieson. We'll have to leave it there. Thank you for the back and forth. Former Labour spokesman James Mathieson putting up the side for a new wealth tax. Well, I'm sure, you know, there'll be people who agree, disagree. Get your thoughts in.
No, it is important to note that there are a few wealth taxes in the world. Spain has one. Doesn't raise really much money at all. I think Norway has one, or is it Sweden? And again, it's a very, very low rate, doesn't raise very much money. One country that has a serious wealth tax is Switzerland. But do you know why they have a wealth tax? Because they don't have an inheritance tax, and they don't have a capital gains tax. And it replaces some of those taxes that you were talking about earlier, Emily.
We already have wealth taxes.
I mean, there is nowhere anywhere on the face of the planet that is a serious advanced economy that has the kind of wealth tax that Neil Kinnock was describing, a 2% wealth tax, which in reality is not a 2% tax, because if it's a 2% on the whole asset, the income someone will have off the back of that asset might be a 6% return.
James, Tom.
So then you do an additional, you've got your 6% return. You take maybe 3% off that, or half that because of the taxes that already exist. Then you take an additional 2%. I mean, what are you left with? Obviously, you're not going to choose the United Kingdom as the place to base your business.
Also, OK, you tax 2% this year. What happens next year? You have less to tax, don't you? So diminishing returns is what happens. You get less and less each year. And in the meantime, they've probably gone off to Dubai or something, which seems to be the place of choice at the moment. Anyway, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GBNews. Lots more coming up.
Yes, a mother found guilty of killing her in-laws with a poisoned beef Wellington. So what drove Erin Patterson to launch this deadly lunch? But first, it's your news with Sophia.
Very good afternoon. These are the headlines shortly after 12:30. A memorial service took place at St Paul's Cathedral today for the victims of the July 7th bombing. Families of victims, first responders, police and other transport staff who were on duty that day in 2005 were all in attendance. Sir Keir Starmer is facing a fresh backbench revolt over controversial plans to overhaul special needs education, scrapping the system which ensures pupils with special needs such as autism and ADHD get personalised school support. President Donald Trump is threatening extra tariffs, saying any nation aligning with the economic agenda of the BRICS alliance will face an additional 10% tariff, with no exceptions. Erin Patterson has been found guilty in Australia of serving a toxic death cap mushroom in a home-cooked beef Wellington that killed 3 members of her family. And the annual festival of the San Fermin kicks off today with the first running of the bulls. Hundreds of runners dressed in the traditional white and red outfits sprinted ahead of the powerful animals along the 875-metre route, with only 6 people going to hospital. Those are the headlines for now. More news at the top of the hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good afternoon, Britain. We're going to head straight back to St Paul's Cathedral, where attendees are now leaving the service in honour of the 7/7 victims 20 years on. Home and Security Editor Mark White is at the scene.
OK, great. Do you want me to have the guests available straight away, or do you want me to start something?
Well, we are waiting now for the royal party, Her Royal Highness, His Royal Highnesses, I should say, the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh, who, of course, were the lead representatives of the royal family here for this memorial service at St Paul's Cathedral. What we get now, of course, is carefully choreographed and, incredible professional escort service that the Special Escort Group of the Metropolitan Police supply for these VIPs in conjunction with their own close protection officers in of course, the armoured vehicles that you see there, but alongside them are the plain white Metropolitan Police motorbikes of the Special Escort Group. And as I say, that's the reason why it's so carefully choreographed, because you get these bikes that just shoot in, they whisk one group of VIPs away. It will be the first, as I say, the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh, and then we'll have the other dignitaries, the other VIPs, and of course they're represented here by the current Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, former Prime Minister Sir Tony Blair, who was of course the Prime Minister at the time of the 7/7 bombings, and Theresa May, another former Prime Minister who was Prime Minister between 2016 and 2019, and a Prime Minister that lived through a really tumultuous period in terms of the terror threat that this country faced as well. It was at the height of the Islamic State of ISIS, and remember of course 2017, that horrific year when there were half a dozen terrorist attacks across the UK, including the Westminster attack, in which people were killed on Westminster Bridge by a terrorist in his vehicle. He jumped out of the vehicle at the Palace of Westminster and murdered PC Keith Palmer there. Other terrorist attacks, of course, that year included the horrific events on London Bridge, where again it was another mowing down of innocent members of the public, followed by a knife rampage, but this time involving 3 terrorists. And Theresa May, of course, also still in office when the Ariana Grande concert in Manchester was attacked. So she has known, as Prime Minister, her share of absolute tragedies that have been committed on the part of those professing to follow some twisted ideology. And here they were all gathered today to what was the most challenging of circumstances in 2005. It was a period on the 7th of July in that year that changed, forever changed, the face of terrorism in this country. Until then, we had of course been used to a terrorist threat and regular terrorist attacks, but predominantly then from the IRA, a group that would normally give a warning, a group that certainly didn't indulge in suicide bombings. That all changed with the Islamist terror threat and the 7/7 bombings that marked the first use of suicide bombers here in the UK, with those 4 suicide bombers, and that was followed just 2 weeks later by another attempt to use suicide bombs by 4 other terrorists who wanted to carry out a carbon copy of what happened on 7/7, again targeting 3 London Underground trains and a London bus. Thankfully, on that occasion, that terrorist attack didn't come to full fruition, because although the detonators on the devices exploded, the main charge of these explosives didn't ignite, or we would have seen more carnage on that day. And then, of course, just the very next day, another terrible tragedy, a tragedy in which an innocent man lost his life. That innocent man, a Brazilian, Jean-Charles de Menezes, who had the misfortune of living in a property in Scotia Road in South London, a property that one of the would-be bombers from the day before, on the 21st of July, also lived in. And the surveillance team that was surveilling that property, that had eyes on that property, followed Jean-Charles de Menezes and became increasingly convinced that he was the bomber, one of the bombers, the man they were looking for. And that all ended in a carriage at Stockwell tube station when police rushed on board, believing they were coming face to face with a suicide bomber, and shot Jean-Charles de Menezes in the head 7 times. An absolutely horrific tragedy, a terrible mistake which the Metropolitan Police absolutely owned up to, but it was the times we were living in. You're now hearing, of course, how could you miss them, the bells of St Paul's Cathedral sounding now to signal the end of that special memorial service marking 2 decades since the 7th of July terrorist attacks. And at some point now in the coming minutes we will see the Royals depart here, the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh depart here at St Paul's Cathedral, followed then by those other VIPs, those former Prime Ministers, the Mayor of London, and of course others representing the Metropolitan Police Service, the London Fire Brigade, the Ambulance Service, and then of course also those who were caught up in the tragedy, those bereaved family members who lost their loved ones that day, and then the others, the survivors, more than 770 who were injured that day. But it wasn't just those who were injured, there were many, many others who were on the transport system in London who witnessed horrors that they will never forget. People that wanted to be here to pay their respects and to say that 20 years on, 2 decades may have passed, but they will always remember those who lost their lives and the day that terrorism in this country changed forever.
Incredibly moving service that took place in St Paul's Cathedral. As you say, it's hard to believe it's been 20 years. I think most of us can remember hearing the news and the fear that we may or may not know a relative or a friend who had taken one of these tube lines that morning. Absolutely horrendous, and worth a time to also remember just how big the threat is that's still out there. You said how it's changed. The threat is still there, but it's changed away from sort of coordinated attacks to more lone wolf strategies. As we're staring at the door there of St Paul's Cathedral, we're expecting to see the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh, expecting to see the Prime Minister and former Prime Ministers, expecting to see representatives from the police, the authorities, Sadiq Khan, of course, of the London Mayor. Incredibly moving at lunchtime.
Yes, indeed. I mean, the threat picture has changed. It's not to say that there aren't still those that would like to carry out coordinated and sophisticated attacks. It's just that the majority of the attacks that we've seen since then have been these lower sophistication attacks, usually involving one individual, but of course the London Bridge attack in 2017 did involve 3 terrorists on that occasion. But the police and security services warn of a resurgence both of ISIS and of Al-Qaeda. Those groups were disrupted, they were dismantled to a large degree, but in the years since they have been gaining strength, gaining support again, and building bases in a number of countries throughout the Middle East and beyond. And they have the capacity and they absolutely have the intent to carry out fresh attacks, and they indeed have been doing that. We've seen, especially in mainland Europe, a number of attacks that have taken place in recent months, in Germany in particular, that have been linked to the Islamic State. So the threat is very much still alive, and that's why, of course, you'll see this very carefully choreographed removal of the royals and then the VIPs, the Prime Ministers and others from here with the highest of security, because they never know when the terrorist might strike. The terrorist is out to cause carnage, is out to cause maximum damage and of course gain maximum publicity. And events like this, when you have very high profile figures in the public realm at public occasions like this, are always potentially high risk. But you were talking there about the the service itself. And I think, you know, it was particularly moving for me in hearing those survivors and relatives of those who'd lost their lives reading out the names of all 52 people, all 52 innocent people who died on the 7th of July 2005. It's always something very moving when we see that enacted every year in the United States, where they are reading out literally thousands of names, but 52 names is still very, very impactful. And those people who had to read out those names struggled with their emotions. As we see now, the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh being led down the stairs here at St Paul's Cathedral, having sat through hundreds of other people, that very emotional memorial service with those family members reading out the names of those who died that day. And then, of course, we also had the very emotional impact statements that were sort of read as well, moments of recollection as we see Prince Edward and Princess Sophie getting into the back of their Range Rover there, about to be driven away under police escort. Those very emotional statements that were read out by, again, survivors and by relatives of those who perished that day. 4 statements that were read out during the service, reflecting, of course, the separate incidents that took place at Edgware Road and at Russell Square and Aldgate, and of course on that bus at Tavistock Square, as the first of these VIP escorts, that royal motorcade, leaves St Paul's Cathedral. We are now waiting, of course, for the next VIP to come. Their vehicle is not yet here, but I can see them out of the corner of my eye just moving into place now. So this may be, and it is, our current Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, making his way out onto the steps of St Paul's Cathedral, about to go down, and he is with Sir Sadiq Khan, the London Mayor, extending an arm of friendship, of course, to the London Mayor as they head down the steps. Sir Keir Starmer to his motor vehicle, and of course the London Mayor, he has his own escort as well, as he's presumed to be a high-risk figure in terms of requiring a close protection detail as well. But you see the Range Rover and the vehicle that will be carrying the Prime Minister as they head off back to Downing Street as well today by the Special Escort Group of the Metropolitan Police. And as I said earlier, we still have at the service attending 2 other former Prime Ministers, Sir Tony Blair, who was the Prime Minister at the time of 7/7, and Theresa May, Prime Minister during the years of 2016, 2017, of course, when there were those 6 terrorist attacks in the UK. For Sir Tony Blair, this must be a particularly poignant service. I know that he has grappled with and struggled with how the events that he set in train, the war in Iraq, and of course also going into Afghanistan alongside the Americans in the wake of 9/11, may have impacted the terrorist picture in this country. And he's spoken before of course, they knew there was always a risk that those who seek an excuse to carry out murderous attacks like 7/7 will use the likes of the war in Iraq to justify that. And of course, that's what we saw. Dame Eliza Manningham-Buller, who was the head of MI5 at the time of 7/7, had warned Tony Blair and others in government that going into Iraq would certainly raise the threat level in this country. But that decision was taken, for good or for bad. The decision was taken by that Prime Minister of the day. And then in the years afterwards, 2 years after that invasion, we saw the subsequent terrorist attack with the martyrdom videos that were made by those terrorists claiming that the justification for the attack was the war in Iraq. But as Tony Blair and others have said, these terrorists would seek any justification to carry out murderous attacks in the name of whatever twisted ideology. I think I see Charles Clarke actually up there on the steps of St Paul's Cathedral. Charles Clarke was the Home Secretary at the time of the 7/7 terrorist attacks. A very, very difficult job that he had. I remember seeing him, trying to speak to him at the time. He was never really a chap that you would ever describe as being media friendly, and certainly during that time his focus was understandably and completely on the job he had to do as Home Secretary, responding to the 7/7 attacks and knowing that that might not be a one-off, that it might signal other attacks. And sure enough, just 2 weeks after 7/7, we saw that failed copycat attack on the London Underground system and on a London bus. Thankfully, on that occasion, the ingredients for those bombs, those hydrogen peroxide improvised explosive devices, was not distilled down enough, that hydrogen peroxide mixture, to make it a deadly explosive. So what we saw on the Underground and on that bus were loud bangs as the detonators exploded, but the actual main charge thankfully never ignited on that day. And of course, after that, we then had that manhunt for 4 would-be suicide bombers on the loose. So a very difficult time for Charles Clarke. I can only imagine what must be going through his head as he reflects back on that tumultuous time. And there, Charles Clarke, alongside our current Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, and the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, also coming into shots there. The Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch, also coming down the steps to get into their vehicles that are just waiting around the corner. You know, obviously, Yvette Cooper is now Home Secretary. At the time she was in government, she was still part of that administration. So again, she will have so many memories of 7/7, of that time. And Tony Blair there, just behind with Charles Clarke. Tony Blair, 73 years of age now, not the young man that we all remember, of course, from his early days in office, 1997, as he bounded up Downing Street, and then, of course, remained in office for over a decade, his administration did, and saw some very tumultuous times. As I say, those wars in Afghanistan and Iraq following 9/11. There you see Theresa May as well coming towards us. Former Prime Minister Theresa May, the last of the Prime Ministers here now, walking off round the corner to meet her police escort as she'll be taken away from St Paul's Cathedral. So here at St Paul's Cathedral, the end of what was a very moving service, marking 2 decades since the day London was forever changed.
Thank you for bringing us all of those big names who've been there at the service on this important anniversary of a seismic event.
Absolutely. Well, it is now 1 o'clock. You're watching Good Afternoon Britain. It's Monday, the 7th of July, 2025. I'm Emily Carver.
And I'm Tom Hart.
And yes, 20 years ago today.
Fairly wrong. We really don't know at the moment. It's loud bangs. We need ambulances and water to Russell to King's Cross. I understand what you're saying. And Russell Square. Russell Square is priority. We're going to have it as a major incident.
Yes, 20 years since the 7/7 attacks that killed 52 and injured over 700. 2 decades on, is Britain any safer?
Elsewhere, is there another government rebellion brewing? Sir Keir Starmer faces fresh fury from his own MPs, this time over support for special needs children. With no guarantee of legal rights for vulnerable pupils, is this welfare reform Mark II?
After last week's battle with his own backbenchers on benefits, another battle looms for Sir Keir Starmer. Will he have to change plans or water them down if he's going to cut them for the parents of disabled children?
Over the weekend, 29 arrested under terror laws after Palestine action ban. After that ban came into force, supporters now risking jail for even voicing their support. Is the line between protest and terrorism, has it just been redrawn?
And the mushroom murder mystery that shocked Australia and the world. A mum found guilty of killing her in-laws with a poisoned beef Wellington. So what drove Erin Patterson to plan this deadly lunch?
And if you're watching the tennis over the weekend, there was a bit of a blunder, wasn't there, at Wimbledon? The AI line judge was accidentally switched off during a crucial centre court clash, prompting chaos, confusion and a mid-rally stoppage. Just how reliable is tennis's tech revolution? Oh dear.
Well, it is a busy day of news to get through. Of course, looking at the terror threat as it stands today, reflecting on what that was 20 years ago, but also, as we were discussing, a huge rebellion for this government. It's easy to forget that this government has a massive majority in the House of Commons. It's behaving like it has no majority at all. Has it just lost control?
It does look like that, doesn't it? And with these stories about scratching around for a wealth tax to try and plug this gap, well, maybe if you hadn't created this financial black hole, then we wouldn't be in the position where we're scrambling around for more and more things to tax. But that is the state of play. But this special needs help for pupils, it is quite staggering how many children now require this support.
I mean, the
really
amount that we
staggering.
spent on it in 2022 was £8 billion. The amount we're spending on it this year is £12 billion.
50% increase.
That is a 50% increase in the space of just a handful of years. And that's real money. That's a huge amount of money. I mean, what's going on in the system? Are people being misdiagnosed? Is the criteria set wrong?
Tom, get this. Severe learning difficulties and physical disabilities make up just 4% of those who need these EHCPs, which is the Education, Health and Care Plans.
So 96% of children who are on these special care plans don't have severe needs?
No, so there's been a huge rise, as you might expect, in autism, which of course it varies massively, speech, language and communication needs, social, emotional and mental health needs, which includes ADHD. So things like that. Now, 639,000 children in England need this support. 11% increase in the year to January.
No wonder our
double what it was.
Bankrupt.
Double what it was 6 years ago. And this is the thing: the government may well be right to want to reform this and think, you know, can we spend this money better? Because it's the councils that have to pick up the bill,
Absolutely.
isn't it?
And then councils are going bankrupt left, right, and centre, and taxes are going up. But all of that to be discussed and so much more after your latest news headlines with Sophia.
Tom, thank you. Very good afternoon. It's just gone 1 o'clock. These are your latest headlines. A memorial service has taken place today at St Paul's Cathedral for the victims of the July 7th bombings. King Charles has called on the nation to remember the extraordinary courage and compassion 2 decades after London's deadliest terror attack. 52 people were killed and hundreds injured when the suicide bombers struck 3 tube trains and a bus. Sir Keir Starmer and Sir Sadiq Khan both laid wreaths this morning in London in remembrance of the bombings. Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, spoke earlier on the spirit of Londoners.
What we did see, though, was some remarkable acts of kindness, of bravery. It's a reminder that actually London stood together. And we've got to remind ourselves that what these terrorists seek to do is to drive a wedge between different communities. They seek to sow division and hatred. And London stood united, not just against the terrorists, but united supporting each other.
Sir Keir Starmer is facing a fresh backbench revolt over controversial plans to overhaul special needs education. There are reports that ministers are poised to scrap the system which ensures pupils with special needs, such as autism and ADHD, get personalised support at school, currently costing the taxpayer £12 billion a year. Senior party figures warn the reforms risk becoming welfare Mark II, as the government faces mounting pressure to balance the books on public finances. Meanwhile, specialist nursery teachers in disadvantaged areas will be offered £4,500 cash incentives to boost early years education. The new scheme, part of the government's Best Start in Life strategy, will also see Ofsted inspect all new providers within 18 months of opening from next April onwards. The Education Secretary says the plans aim to ensure every child gets the foundation they need to succeed, regardless of their background. Minister for Early Years, Stephen Morgan, told GBNews he wants to ensure the system is fit for the future.
I talk to parents all the time, obviously in my own constituency, on visits that I do and those that write to me, and they would agree that the system just isn't working at the moment. And our priority is to get it right at the right place for every child. We've put more money in to send. We put £1 billion in high needs funding in last year. We've put more money in for what capital, so more places in mainstream settings as well. Our Best Start centres, there will be dedicated professionals in those centres to support children with SEND. So the money's going in, the investment's going in, and we want to deliver the reform to make sure the system is fit for the future.
Turning stateside, Donald Trump is threatening extra tariffs on countries backing BRICS policies he sees as anti-American. The US president says any nation aligning with the economic agenda of the BRICS alliance, made up of Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, will face an additional 10% tariff, with no exceptions. His post on Truth Social came shortly after BRICS leaders issued a joint statement warning that rising tariffs were threatening global trade. It comes as President Trump's administration is racing to finalise a string of new trade deals before a deadline on the 9th of July. Meanwhile, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is heading back to Washington today to discuss a potential ceasefire for Gaza. Staying in the US, at least 78 people are dead and dozens more still missing after flash floods swept through central Texas. This includes 27 campers and counsellors from Camp Mystic after it was inundated on Friday after the river burst its banks. The search teams battle on through the deep mud and unstable debris as storms threaten to return within the next 48 hours. Texas Governor Greg Abbott says authorities will stop at nothing to find those still missing. And a woman has been found guilty in Australia of serving a deadly mushroom lunch that killed 3 members of her family. Erin Patterson was convicted in Morwell, Victoria for murder after prosecutors said she knowingly used a toxic death cap mushroom in a home-cooked beef Wellington that left her in-laws and an aunt gravely ill. All 3 died later on. The court heard she lied to the police as she tried to cover her tracks by disposing of evidence. Her defence claimed the poisonings were a tragic accident, but the jury sided with prosecutors after one guest, a local pastor, survived but remained seriously unwell. And parents who lose a pregnancy before 24 weeks will soon be entitled to bereavement leave under new government plans. Ministers will amend the Employment Rights Bill to ensure protected time off after early pregnancy loss, closing a long-criticised legal gap. Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner says the move will give grieving parents space to process their loss, something not currently guaranteed in law unless stillbirth occurs after 24 weeks. And the annual festival San Fermin kicks off today with the first running of the bulls. Hundreds of runners dressed in the traditional white and red outfits sprinted ahead of the powerful animals along the 875-metre route. Emergency services reported that 6 people were taken to hospital with injuries to their arms and legs, but none were gored during the run. Tourists travelling from all over the world to run alongside the locals over the 7 days makes this event one of the most famous across Spain in the summer months. Those are the latest GBNews headlines for now. More from me in just under half an hour. But first, let's check in on the markets.
My Claim Group sponsors the GBNews Finance Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of the markets this afternoon. The pound will buy you $1.360 and €1.159. Price of gold is £2,425.58 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 8,836 points.
My Claim Group sponsors the GB News Finance Report.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 10 minutes past 1, and is a rebellion brewing for the Prime Minister? Yes, not the same one as last week, yet another one. I mean, how many U-turns has this government had? And it could be that there is yet another rebellion brewing on the backbenches, all to do with children who have special educational needs.
Yes, and Christopher Hope, our political editor, has just been hearing from the Prime Minister's spokesperson. Christopher, have we heard any more detail on what these changes might actually look like, what's actually coming down the road?
Not yet. The government says, for its part, Tom and Emily, is starting a conversation about the SEND provision. 639,000 children have these reports. 100,000 of them are sent to private school to be helped and supported. Three-quarters of them have issues to do with language, autistic spectrum, social, emotional, mental health needs. Only a quarter have severe physical disabilities. All these children are in need and parents want to support them. The government says at this hour they want to work with parents to ensure, and they understand how desperate they are to ensure they get the right care. They say they want to make the system work. A consultation is starting and we'll report back in the autumn. But the politics of this, and these are children and parents in desperate need for support, is that how can we keep paying for this? When will this government make a tough choice of what we can't afford to do? They couldn't do it last week, of course, with the reform to personal independence payment. That's left a £5 billion hole in the fiscal rules. We'll see if that's being filled.
I'm sorry, Chris, we're struggling to hear you against the wind. I know Downing Street can be a wind tunnel at certain times. We'll try and see if we can get a cleaner audio feed there. But, Emily, it is clearly a problem for the government. I mean, they've faced, yet again, like they did with personal independence payments, they're looking at an exploding amount of money that is being spent on this, but it's a politically difficult thing for the government because their backbenchers simply don't support the government on the cuts that arguably they need to find if they want to keep taxes the level they are now.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like every welfare bill that the government is coming across has ballooned significantly in the past handful of years. Even, as you said, 50% on just a few years ago. That is a huge amount of money.
Until today, 50% more.
Has the economy in this country grown to that extent to make up for that increase in welfare? Now, of course, there will be people who have children who have severe difficulties, who desperately need help from the state, from the local council, that does need to be paid for by the British taxpayer, of course. And I've heard stories of how it can be very hard indeed to access that particular help, depending on where you are in the country. But as with all of these benefits, they grow and grow and grow and grow and grow, and you're capturing things that in the past you wouldn't have captured at all under the banner of special needs.
And it does a disservice to those who genuinely need the help.
As always.
Because if you have people who are frankly taking the pee, they are then taking that money from what should be more dedicated towards those with the severe disabilities. And I heard from a councillor not so long ago of a case where one family with two children each were getting a separate taxi for these two children to go to and from school every single day because they were classified as SEND kids. They were going to the same school, but they needed two separate cars because they couldn't bear to be in the same car together. And this was costing more than it costs to send a child to boarding school at Eton. That's coming out of council money for this one family,
crazy,
two children, just on the taxis to get to school.
It's actually crazy. And there's no joined-up thinking, is there? Anyway, really, with this government, it seems. Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary, targeting private schools. Some of these private schools cater for special needs kids. Some of those will unfortunately have to close down because of the VAT that people have to pay on the private school fees now. So that's making it more difficult. That's meaning that we need more state provision for special needs kids. You've also got, as you've got with the benefits bill, as you've got with PIP, as you've got with all sorts of different welfare, suddenly symptoms that didn't used to means special needs.
Is a child slightly fidgety?
Suddenly do. I mean, I don't know. Tell us if we're wrong. Perhaps, you have experience of your children, grandchildren going through the system, not being able to get adequate support. It takes one child, doesn't it? One disruptive child who needs extra help in a class, a normal class of children, it can destroy the education for everyone in the room, can't it? So it is important that if a kid has issues, that they are taken care of.
Yeah.
But can we afford 639,000 children in England needing these special, carefully tailored plans?
I mean, the numbers
paid for by everyone else?
Just astonishing. I mean, it's often easy to forget what a billion is, because we throw the word billion out there so much all the time. £12 billion being spent on this year. That is £1,000 in tax from 12 million taxpayers.
Yeah. A lot of zeros.
It's a huge amount of money for 639,000 children.
Well, there you go. There you go. Let us know your thoughts if you have any experience of the system as well. But, of course, it's not going to be a great look for Labour, is it, after the welfare bill was such a shambles, and now moving on to disabled kids, this will be framed as.
Yeah.
So there you go. That's the next target. Anyway, as we've been covering, the memorial service that took place at St Paul's Cathedral for the victims of the July 7th bombings 20 years ago in 2005.
Yes, King Charles has called on the nation to remember the extraordinary courage and compassion 2 decades after London's deadliest terror attack.
Yes, 52 people were sadly killed and hundreds injured when suicide bombers struck 3 tube trains and a bus.
Well, the 7/7 attacks were the worst wake-up call imaginable for the UK's counter-terrorism operations. But 20 years on, is the UK any safer?
Well, joining us now is former British Transport Police Chief Constable Andy Trotter. Andy, keen to find out how you feel on this. 20 years on from this hideous incident that claimed so many lives. Do you think we've learnt lessons?
Without a doubt. I mean, firstly, my thoughts on today, obviously, we think about those who died, those who are injured, and their families. And we also think about the response by the Blue Light Services and the NHS and colleagues from TfL, I think all of whom did an amazingly good job on that day. Incredibly complex set of circumstances. And I thought the reaction of all of the Blue Light Services and Londoners in general to this dreadful day was quite remarkable. As far as the lessons learned, clearly there was a review. And there were lessons learned from that, but we've got to keep learning lessons, because since that time, of course, we've had the Manchester Arena attack, we've had London Bridge, Westminster Bridge, Borough Market, Glasgow Airport, a whole range of different attacks. And each time those are reviewed to say, well, what else could we do better each time? But this is a relentless matter of preparation for what may come in the future, the work by our intelligence services every day to try and head off attacks, head off threats to our country. So this is a never-ending task that we all face.
That day, 7/7, I mean, how did you go about dealing with this scenario? I understand that there was just so much confusion in a day before most people had mobile phones, or certainly before smartphones were even invented. I mean, it must have taken a long time to coordinate the response.
Yes, I mean, it was very confusing, because quite clearly, we had reports coming in from Aldgate, from Liverpool Street, from Russell Square, from King's Cross, from Edgware Road, from Paddington, and numerous other places as well, as the injured were coming out from different exits from the underground, and a series of other confusing reports from the public. But what did strike me was that the way that the Blue Light Services got a grip on the situation remarkably quickly. And that isn't to be in any way self-congratulatory. I think it was just a fact. And the fact is also we trained a lot together. We exercised together. We dealt with lots of different scenarios through that training. And I felt the response on the day was as it should be. And I'm very grateful to everyone who did respond so well. And particularly grateful for TfL for evacuating the tube so promptly, so we didn't have another problem with thousands of people stuck underground on a blazing hot day. Clearly, there were lessons to be learned from it, and anyone can read the reports into that. I think it was a very good response to a very, very chaotic scene. But also, we saw the NHS, we saw doctors and nurses running to the scene. The charities are getting involved, and ordinary Londoners getting involved. So, it was a horrible, dreadful, awful day. But I would say that we have learned lessons from that, but we must continue to learn those lessons.
Absolutely, and it's always an ever-changing threat, isn't it? Andy Trotter, thank you so much, former British Transport Police Chief Constable who helped to coordinate the response on the ground on that day. We're going to go back to Downing Street and speak to our political editor, Christopher Hope, who's got some breaking news for us. Christopher?
That's right, Tom and Erin. Sorry about the wind here in Downing Street, but this week we're seeing Emmanuel Macron, the French president, coming to the UK. We can confirm this hour that the President, of course, is meeting, as you expect, with Sir Keir Starmer, almost certainly, and with other ministers. He's also meeting on the opposition side with the Tory leader, Kevin Badenoch, and with the Liberal Democrat leader, Sir Ed Davey. But as things stand, he's not meeting with Nigel Farage. Of course, Nigel Farage's party, only 4 MPs now after one of their number withdrew themselves from the whip over the weekend. 4 MPs, but of course leading way ahead in the polls and could form the next government. But as things stand, the French President Emmanuel Macron is not meeting with the Reform UK leader Nigel Farage. Friends of him have told us this hour he has no idea if he's meeting with Mr Macron, but Mr Macron is meeting with Kevin Badenoch and Sir Ed Davey.
Interesting point, because it has become more and more common for world leaders to meet opposition figures. I mean, we've seen it with British prime ministers and indeed opposition leaders when they go over to the United States. Yeah. We saw it, Donald Trump met opposition leaders in the Netherlands. I mean, it does happen very often. And particularly because Reform has for some time now held a commanding lead in the polls, this seems like a curious diplomatic position for Emmanuel Macron to take.
We're not sure at this moment whether it's Buckingham Palace may have told the Elysee Palace who Macron should meet, or whether Macron said, I'm not meeting Farage, I'll meet the other 2. Of course, there are other parties with more MPs in Parliament, the SNP, for example, so we mustn't see it in isolation about Nigel Farage. But given his position in the polls, given the realpolitik of where the polls are going, you might wonder whether it could be wise for Macron to try and meet with Farage and understand where it's coming from. But of course, in Parliament, his party is the 5th or 6th biggest party, I think. So obviously, technically, there's no need for them to meet. But maybe practically, pragmatically, that meeting could be important. But as things stand, it's not happening. And of course, that will allow supporters of Farage's party to say he's being snubbed by the French president.
Well, yes, absolutely. Christopher Hope, thank you so much. Our political editor there outside Downing Street with the latest from the heart of government there, as always.
Do stay with us here on Good Afternoon Britain, and during the next advert break, perhaps without your mobile phone, because there's plenty of time to grab your chance to win our biggest ever cash prize. It's an incredible £54,321, all tax-free. And here's how you can get your chance to make it yours.
You have the chance to win our biggest cash prize to date in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. As there's an incredible £54,321 in tax-free cash to be won. What would you spend it on? A brand new car, the holiday of a lifetime, or just the chance to sit back, relax, and remove some of those day-to-day financial stresses? £54,321 in tax-free cash has to be won. For another chance to win £54,321 cash, text cash to 63225. One entry costs £2.50 plus 1 standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63225. 5 entries cost £5 plus 1 standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start at £2.50. Call 0903 686 3232. Calls cost £2.50 plus your network access charge, or post your name and number to GB14 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 4 p.m. on the 1st of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
This is our country, and we think it's amazing. From high tea to the high street, we love it all. Even the rain, we like that too. There's nowhere else we'd rather be. That's why we're here to be the fearless champion of Britain, its voices and its values. Because we are GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Well, in the past few minutes, Meghan Markle has paid a sweet tribute to Princess Lilibet as she turns 4 today. It comes just a day after the Duchess of Sussex said she'd love to go into business with her daughter in the future.
Well, that's all it is, another money-making effort there. That's to make up for nobody buying her jam. I mean, do you really care if you see a picture of her kid or not? You do, that's it.
I'd like to see her face, to be honest.
I don't. Now, back to Diana, of course, who was a real star and style icon and whatever. And one day I can remember I complimented her on her outfit that she was wearing, and it was the same colour as the outfit you were wearing yesterday.
Bottle green?
No. RUC green, Royal Ulster Constabulary green. As she pointed out to me, she said, yes, RUC green, what do you think? And then she went into a whole, literally, sob story. She started crying about a bomb explosion there'd been in Northern Ireland or whatever. She was very, very close, very connected with all of that. But, yeah, so...
And knowledgeable as well, by the sound of things.
She was very knowledgeable, yeah. And then she went on to talk about William and Harry going to school and how that upset her, and they went to boarding school or whatever it is. So we talked about all those things. And I forgot why I was going to tell you that story, but there was some reason. But she was... it was the same colour as what you were wearing yesterday, anyway, the green.
And she was so lovely by the sounds of things.
She was film star status. I mean, you just saw her in a room and you would go...
Wow.
She's special, yeah, she's special.
And I think whoever that was speaking in that report there saying, one of the designers, I think it was the designer of the wedding dress, saying it was just clothes or just a dress, but then Diana wore it and then it was something special. And it became part of history. And that's exactly what happened.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Westminster's full of talk, but out here, it's the real world.
Am I allowed to talk then?
No, that's it. This is where it matters, real people and real lives. That's what politics is all about.
The fact has Trump made a good start? No.
Straight answers, no spin, and just a couple of pints.
How many fingers have I got up?
About 10. So join me for Lee Anderson's Real World every Friday at 7 p.m, only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 27 minutes past 1. Now, the Metropolitan Police has confirmed that it arrested 29 people after they staged a protest in support of the group Palestine Action, the proscribed group, of course. It was designated as a terror group last week.
Yes, the decision to ban Palestine Action follows claims it caused £7 million of damage to RAF planes. But critics call it an authoritarian abuse and attack on protest rights.
So were the police right to make these arrests, or was it an attack on the rights to free speech and protest in this country?
OK, well, to debate this, we're joined by the chairman at the National Jewish Assembly, Gary Mond, and the political commentator, Kieran Andrew. Gary, let's start with you. So, were the police right to arrest these people?
I believe they were. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm under the impression that the House of Commons prescribed Palestine Action earlier last week, and the House of Lords also voted to prescribe Palestine Action, and it moved into law. And if the law has been broken, which I believe it has, then clearly they were right to make those arrests. It's as simple as that.
OK, well, let's throw that to Kieran. What do you think, Kieran?
If I'm going to have to sit on GB News and defend freedom of speech, when GB News, A, is supposed to be the home of freedom of speech in this country's media landscape, and B, the law that was brought in is being led as part of a Keir Starmer-led putsch against free speech. If I'm going to have to be in that unenviable position, I'm going to be utterly stunned, to be perfectly honest with you. Of course, it was totally wrong. It was a total waste. It will mark a total waste of taxpayers' money. It will clog up the police time, also the judicial system, going through the legislature. This is just all a waste of everybody's time and money. And it's backed only by those that want to kowtow to a foreign government.
Well, shall we throw that back? Because, Gary, this is, I think, slightly bewildering to some
I think we need to ask what he means by kowtowing to a foreign government. So you're saying that this group was prescribed by our parliament because of Israel?
Keir Starmer has no backbone. Keir Starmer has no political vision. And that means that Keir Starmer floats on the political winds, as far as I'm concerned. If he thinks that there is political hay to be made from appealing to a particular constituency in the country, whether he believes in what those people or that group wants or not, he will do it.
So nothing to do with the criminal damage. This is all about the Israeli lobby.
Well, Emily, the criminal damage is covered under criminal law. So why create? Well, I mean, we don't need to designate them a terror group because the law already exists to cover that.
Oh, this is difficult, Gary, because I was sort of half with you until you were sort of doing the kowtowing bit, because clearly this group exists to do criminal things. But I do think you have a point that's saying it's clearly not in the same category as Al-Qaeda or ISIS. So I wonder, Gary, did Parliament jump the gun? Should there have been a slightly different designation for this group? You can make this group illegal. You can say that this group obviously exists to do illegal things and criminal damage and all the rest of it, without putting them in the bucket that means if you say, I support Palestine action, you could be arrested.
Well, the question is, they have essentially supported, they're a very violent group, that much is without any doubt.
Mm-hmm.
And they are most certainly a violent group with their past actions, and not just the question of what they did at Bryce Norton with the £7 million worth of damage. They've been violent for many years going into the past. And I fear that it could be that another group might be reformed with a different name, possibly with the same individuals, and might do the same thing again. So there is one point on which there is some justification in what my opponent is saying, one point, and that is that you need to focus on the individuals rather than focusing just on the name. But certainly I support the prescription of them, as do so many of the members of Parliament. Many of those members of Parliament who voted for the prescription are no fans of the State of Israel. That is absolutely for certain. I particularly single out the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, in that regard.
Go on, Kieran, you're shaking your head dramatically. Go on.
Yeah, I'm shaking my head because I think everybody, I mean, I don't know, Emily and Tom, what your views on this are, but as defenders of the principle of freedom of speech, which I believe are, as defenders, by extension of the principle of freedom of thought, which is, by the way, when you shut down freedom of speech, by extension, you enclose freedom of thought as well, because you forbid people the opportunity to exchange views with each other and learn from each other. Palestine Action, let's just nip this one in the bud as well, by the way, is a non-violent group. It's very possible to object, I don't, but it's very possible to object to what Palestine Action did in the past on the grounds that they were committing criminal damage.
Hang on, Kieran, there is a report of Palestine Action attacking a police officer with a sledgehammer.
Yes.
Excuse me, sorry, Tom, I missed that.
There is a report of Palestine Action attacking a police officer with a sledgehammer when they were trying to break into some arms facility or other. There was physical altercation with security guards and with the police, and one police officer was hit.
In a way, Tom, you've kind of made my point for me. If individuals act like that, they can be prosecuted as individuals under criminal law. The group itself is a non-violent group. It professes non-violent resistance.
Sorry, the group itself is non-violent, and yet it violently attacks police officers and has committed violent damage against aircraft and against buildings. Do you think that you can't be violent?
You can't violently attack an aircraft, for God's sake.
I think if you whack something with a crowbar, that's quite a violent act, is it not?
It's not a violent... Tom, look, OK, let's get back to freedom of speech, shall we? Rod Liddell... Someone's unearthed an article of Rod Liddell saying, let's bomb Glastonbury, right?
Yes, we're going to be covering that later.
I'm crystal... Right, so you should, but I'm crystal clear. I think he should have the right to say such things, actually. Palestine Action has never gone anywhere near as far as that in saying...
OK, Kieran, just to give the last word to Gary, because I feel like, Kieran, you've dominated this last section of the debate. Gary, last word to you.
I think the fundamental point, which we haven't not yet addressed, is that Palestine Action is based on a lie. It is based on the lie that Israel has committed genocide, when in fact the only genocide that was committed in the Middle East in recent times was the genocide of Hamas, where on the 7th of October 2023, it tortured, murdered and raped thousands of people and took 250 people hostage. The true genocidal terrorists are Hamas and their supporters in Gaza. Israel has not committed any form of genocide. It has simply defended itself. Palestine Action is based on a lie.
Yeah, my opponent is a paid-up genocide denier, and he can shout all he likes
Okay, Kieran. Okay, Kieran. Kieran, Andrew, thank you very much indeed. Gary Mond, thank you very much indeed as well. Well, there you go.
Yeah, don't say we don't host all views from all sides of the spectrum here. What do you think? Do you get involved? gbnews.com/your say.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think some people were shocked to see so many people, including very elderly people, arrested by the police. But that is the law now.
And indeed, the Metropolitan Police did issue this statement following the arrests. Officers were responding to a protest in support of Palestine Action in Parliament Square. The group is now prescribed, and expressing support for them is a criminal offence.
OK, well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Lots more coming up. Yes, the mushroom murder mystery that shocked Australia and the world. A mum found guilty of killing her in-laws with a poisoned beef Wellington. So what drove Erin Patterson to plan the deadly lunch?
Good afternoon. The headlines shortly after 1:30. A memorial service has taken place at St Paul's Cathedral this morning for the victims of the July 7th bombings. Families of victims, first responders, police and other transport staff on duty on the day in 2005, all in attendance. Sir Keir Starmer is facing a fresh backbench revolt over controversial plans to overhaul special needs education, currently costing the taxpayer £12 billion a year. President Donald Trump is threatening extra tariffs, saying any nation aligning with the economic agenda of the BRICS alliance will face an additional 10% tariff, with no exceptions. Erin Patterson has been found guilty in Australia of serving a toxic death cap mushroom in a home-cooked beef Wellington that killed 3 members of her family. And at least 78 people are dead, including 27 from a summer camp, with dozens more missing after flash floods swept through central Texas. And the annual Festival of San Fermin kicks off today with the first running of the bulls. Hundreds of runners dressed in the traditional white and red outfits sprinted ahead of the powerful animal along the 875-metre route, with just 6 people being taken to hospital. Those are the headlines for now. More news at the top of the hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. We do have some showers moving across the UK today, but through the day it's going to turn drier and brighter for many of us. Sunny spells, particularly in the west, but heavy downpours, particularly in the east, especially as we end the day and go overnight. There will be some thunderstorms here and there. But showers will continue for the afternoon across central and western Scotland, 1 or 2 running into North Wales, through the Midlands and eastern England. A lot of cloud in these areas. The best of the sunshine across Wales and the southwest, where it will feel cool, but with temperatures at around 23, 24 Celsius, pleasant enough in any sunny spells. The cool breeze continues through the evening, and that will send some further showers into Northern Ireland, central and southern Scotland. Brighter skies arriving into northern Scotland as we end the day. But you can see some intense showers starting to develop at this stage through northern England and the east of England. Some thundery downpours, some lightning flashes as well associated with these. And I think they'll blossom into this area of more persistent rain as the evening progresses, running down the eastern side of the country, pushing into East Anglia, for example, by midnight. That then moves through and drier, clearer weather returns to the vast majority. And under those clear skies, it's going to be a cool night, so a lot more comfortable for sleeping, I think, compared with many nights so far this summer. Then we start off with plenty of sunshine Tuesday morning. In fact, it's a beautiful start to the day for many of us, but a brisk wind blows through the east coast and there'll be further showers here for a time. And there'll be some thicker cloud returning to western Scotland and Northern Ireland, along with some outbreaks of rain. In between, long spells of sunshine and feeling warmer. In fact, it's going to warm up further this week with temperatures into the high 20s, low 30s by the weekend.
Crash Law 24 sponsors GB News Traffic and Travel Report.
Good afternoon, this is the latest AI travel news from gbnews.com. Road users should exercise caution on the A9 Dornoch Bridge, where high winds make driving challenging. The M25 anti-clockwise between junction 3 and 1A has congestion, delaying traffic by 20 minutes. In Stockport, an accident crossing the central reservation has closed all lanes on the M60 clockwise entry slip at junction 26. Lastly, diversions are on the M4 eastbound from Tredegar Park to Coldra due to roadworks, and on the trains expect disruptions on the Great Western Railway to and from Gunnislake. For more travel news, go to gbnews.com.
Crash Law 24 sponsors GB News Traffic and Travel Report.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is now 20-2 and 2 men appear in court today following an incident at Manchester Airport in July last year.
Yes, so both men have pleaded not guilty to the alleged offences as the trial continues today.
Well, let's cross to our reporter Sophie Reaper to learn more.
Well, this morning, the prosecution moved on to counts 2 through 4 on that indictment. Count 2 faced by both brothers, and that is a charge of assault occasioning actual bodily harm, whereas counts 3 and 4 are faced just by younger brother Mohammed Amar's, one of assault occasioning actual bodily harm, the other the assault of an emergency worker. It's worth adding, of course, both brothers deny all of the charges that they face. Now, as I say, this morning, the prosecution, they moved on to those counts, walking the jury through step by step each of the events of that particular night back last summer at Manchester Airport. For example, they walked the jury through the number of punches they say Mohammed Amar's threw at the police officers that night. They say it's a total of 10. They also showed the jury CCTV footage in which they say you can see the moments where PC Marsden aimed a stamp at the head of Mohammed Amar's, although they say, quote, the stamp did not seem to connect. The jury then actually got the opportunity to hear directly from PC Marsden. He gave them an account of his role as an armed officer serving at Manchester Airport and the duties he's expected to carry out. And he told the jury that night he and his colleagues received a report of 2 Asian males fighting, and that based on that they made the decision to give a grade 1 urgent response. Now, the court has broken now for a short lunch break, but this afternoon we're expecting to hear further evidence from PC Marsden as he gives the jury more evidence from that night at Manchester Airport last July.
OK, well, Sophie Reaper, thank you so much for that update on this important trial. That's Sophie Reaper there up in Liverpool at the Crown Court. Well, we were talking a little bit earlier about the prospect of a wealth tax because some big dogs in the Labour Party are suggesting it. Lord Kinnock, for one, is urging the government to introduce such a tax. He says the rich must stop going unscathed and also makes a big claim that it could raise £10 billion.
But could the government resist? Well, today at the lobby briefing, reportedly, they didn't rule one out. So what on earth might be going on? Is it indeed in time to increase taxes on the rich, or might that not be as successful as some people think? Let's get the thoughts of the editorial director at the Institute of Economic Affairs, Christian Niemitz. Christian, Lord Kinnock thinks that we could raise £10 billion with a modest wealth tax. Could we?
Well, that has to be a static analysis where he just assumes that nobody is going to change their behavior once that tax has been introduced. But we know from experience that that is, of course, not how it works. People do respond massively to, well, taxes in general, but certainly a wealth tax. That is one of the areas where people are quite responsive to tax incentives. And that's one of the reasons why most governments that had wealth taxes in the past have abandoned them. They realize once you bring them in, OK, you can raise some money in the first year or so, but then people change their behavior. You either get capital flight or just lower savings rates. People less wealth formation going on in the economy, and then in the end you don't raise much revenue anyway. And of course there is the administrative burden, so wealth taxes are exceptionally difficult to administer.
Christian, we were talking to a socialist a little bit earlier on about this, and he said that no one's going to leave. You know, this is always what's said. It's fear-mongering, blah, blah, blah. It should be that the richest pay the most, and billionaires shouldn't even exist, he said. Christian, do you think sometimes we do over-egg the amount of people that might flee the country if we change the taxes, or is it just, I don't know, I guess human nature?
Well, if somebody claimed that all the millionaires, all the rich people are going to leave as soon as you introduce a wealth tax, then yes, I would say, okay, that's an overreaction. We know that that's not how it works either. But like all taxes, it matters at the margin. So if somebody is deeply rooted here and could never imagine living anywhere else in the world, then of course a tax change is not going to make that person emigrate. But if it's, say, a marginal case, somebody who is maybe already thinking about that possibility, just not very seriously, tax change can very much be the thing that pushes them over the edge. And we already see this. Some people are already leaving. So it's not that we're starting from a base rate of zero immigration of wealthy people. There are already people leaving now, and this is only going to make it worse.
Yeah, I was listening to the IEA podcast not so long ago where you had the tax expert Dan Needle on, and he made an interesting analogy to this claim that you could raise 10 billion quid from a wealth tax. He said, well, let's say there are 10 million people with beards in the country. If we added a £1,000 beard tax to those 10 million people, we'd raise £10 billion, surely. But anyone with half a brain can think, well, OK, some people might pay that tax because they really love their beard, but most surely would just shave it off and avoid the tax.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's a good analogy. So, I mean, it depends on what exactly you want to tax. There are types of taxes that are difficult to avoid, say taxes on some consumer goods that people really like and are not going to, where they're not going to respond very much to the tax. With wealth, it's a lot easier to just make adjustments at the margin to how much you save, how much wealth you are going to build up. And OK, it's maybe slightly trickier than shaving off the beard, but not very much.
Yeah, I'm not sure they're exactly like for like. I would hope that people are more keen to stay in Britain than they are to keep hold of their beard.
You look at the Sunday Times rich list.
Perhaps not.
You look at the Sunday Times rich list and actually look at how long these people on that list stay in the UK. Yes, they're nominally citizens of the UK, but they may be here for 4 months a year. Then they spend a few months in Europe, a few months in the United States, do business all over the world. Just to reduce the amount of their time they stay in Britain by maybe a month or two is not the most costly thing for these people to do.
No, they've got a lot of money.
We need to bear in mind that a large part, I think something like a quarter or so of the top percentile of the income distribution are foreign-born people. So that means they already have a base somewhere else. For them, this would not be such a big deal to just say move back to the place where they originally came from anyway.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because some people try to frame this as a patriotic thing. Well, if you were a patriotic millionaire, you'd stay in this country come what may. But yes, many of the richest people are foreign nationals as well. Dr. Christian Niemitz, thank you very much indeed, Editorial Director at the Institute of Economic Affairs.
Well, we've been talking about people coming to this country and maybe fleeing this country, but if you want to temporarily flee this country, maybe you're on a holiday, you'd want to check the travel weather.
You're looking happy.
Well, the forecast looks good.
So you've sorted the travel insurance then?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
The heat wave across Europe is increasingly becoming confined to eastern areas of the country. Temperatures here could locally still be 5-10 degrees above normal for the year. On the edge of that heat, though, there are some heavy thunderstorms breaking out for the Balkans and over the Alps. Generally further towards the west, though, temperatures now easing back towards average, but northerly winds bringing a touch of cloud to parts of Iberia, as well as Madeira and Tenerife. Generally, though, for many areas over the next few days, there will be a lot of sunshine around.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Welcome back to Breakfast. Now, experts are warning that lithium suppliers will not keep up with the demand for electric cars.
Yeah, researchers say domestic lithium production could grow as much by about 10 times what it currently is by 2030, but will still fall short of demand.
So this morning we're asking whether Labour's green car policy is unachievable.
This policy tells you everything you need to know about net zero. This isn't about
giving people free choices about the technologies they want to use. This is about saying we're going to have mandatory targets. It's a sad indictment on our country if we've just normalized the government making these fundamental decisions for people's lives. The CEBR has warned that this policy might cost the country. That's rigid targets for battery electric vehicles, known as the ZEV mandate. 80% of all vehicles will have to be electric vehicles by 2030, rising to 100% by 2035. And that policy is expected to cost £400 billion to the UK economy. And of course, car makers as well have warned that this policy is not achievable.
The latest stats say 47% of vehicles sold in Britain are now EVs. We're halfway there after just 2 years of the electric mandate. We've another 5 years to go. It's speeding up. And this charge that lithium, we're going to have a shortage of lithium, is nonsense. What it says is that there may be the consumption of lithium is increasing, so the domestic production will not be sufficient, but there's plenty in the world.
GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
At GB News, we love to hear from you, our loyal community. So drop us a line at gbnews.com/yoursay. There you can talk to each other and also to the presenters live on air. gbnews.com/yoursay, because GB News is your channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's just gone 10-2. Now, Wimbledon has been forced to apologise after revealing that a new electronic line calling system failed at a critical moment.
Yeah, it was all during Sonny Kartal's fourth-round match against Russian star Anastasia Pavlyuchenkova because it was accidentally switched off. So was this human error?
Well, it sounds like it could be, but let's listen to what the umpire said.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your patience. The electronic line calling system, unfortunately, was unable to track the last point, so we will replay the point.
So, yes, Pavlyuchenkova later accused officials of British bias, claiming a game was stolen from her when a clearly long shot by Kartal was not called out due to the system malfunction on centre court.
Well, joining us now is broadcaster and journalist for Sports Matters, Chris Scudder. Chris, thanks so much for joining us. This is, of course, a big deal when something goes so wrong, and it's created loads of headlines about how tech shouldn't be involved. But was the tech error or human error?
Well, it's human error. Somebody switched it off. You couldn't make it up, really, could you, for such a high-profile thing as Wimbledon? But, you know, it's a wider issue here. We've seen Hawkeye very successfully used in football and cricket particularly. But, you know, you can't legislate for human error. I think a lot of people who don't like VAR just want more human interaction, because it just brings the human side of spirit of sport. You have to feel for the umpire here, because he, according to Pavlyuchenkova afterwards, said he didn't know what to do. He didn't want to be seen to make a mistake, didn't want to intervene, even though he thought it was out, and that's not right. So let's have the officials playing more of a part in football. We can't have VAR refereeing the game. It's the person on the field has got to be having the final say, surely.
So did this Pavlyuchenkova, did she show a lot of attitude when this happened?
Well, she did, yeah. I mean, she thought she'd been cheated because as a local player, Sonny Kartal, and, you know, I mean, she lost that game. It could have cost her the first set, but in the end, she won the match in straight sets. But, you know, they're human. What we don't want is to lose the magic moments. Well, you two are probably too young to remember, but if I said to you, chalk flew up John McEnroe, back in whenever it was, the 1980s. You cannot be serious. That was the
you
same issue. You
cannot be serious.
Exactly. Fantastic stuff. And, you know, that was one of the most memorable moments in Wimbledon history. And, you know, they are human, the players. So
absolutely,
let's have human referees, umpires as well, not just... if I've got time to say it, that Hawkeye went wrong in a very important football match in the Premier League during lockdown when it wasn't human error. It was the camera just couldn't see the ball had crossed the line. A Villa game against Sheffield United, it cost Bournemouth relegation, and Aston Villa survived simply because the camera couldn't see. So, you know, it's good in some respects, but it's not perfect.
I mean, I quite like the fact that they could get it wrong sometimes. You know, yes. On the occasion, get it wrong. You just have to learn in life. Life isn't fair sometimes. You know, got to put up with a bad call every now and again. But perhaps that's not the world we live in now.
It's easier to put up with a bad call from a human being than from a robot, I suppose.
True. Yes, Chris Gunner, we'll have to leave it there. But thank you very much indeed, sports broadcaster and journalist. Enjoy the rest of Wimbledon. I did watch some yesterday. It was good stuff. Love it. Very relaxing to have in the background.
I just don't like how so much reporting around this story has blamed the AI. It was the humans who were wrong.
Trust him to always defend the robots.
It was the humans made the error.
We'll start a little trade union for the robots.
Yeah, the robots did nothing wrong. Look, I'm just trying to get into the robots' good books, because when the revolution happens and the robots take over, I will be spared.
Tom's very polite to ChatGPT.
I always say please and thank you.
You say please and thank you. I'm more demanding than that.
No, I'm just getting ready for when there are robots walking the streets, which I actually genuinely don't think is that far away.
Yeah, people could start marrying robots, couldn't they?
But this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News, and there's plenty more to come, so don't move a muscle. We'll be back to this question of 20...
Imagine having an extra £1,000 to spend each week for an entire year. £54,321 in tax-free cash could be yours. Cash to spend however you like. £54,321 in cash could be landing in your bank account this year. For another chance to win £54,321 cash, text cash to 63225. One entry costs £2.50 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63225. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start at £2.50. Call 0903 686 3232. Calls cost £2.50 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB14 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 4 p.m. on the 1st of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Britain's Newsroom with Andrew and Beth.
Hello everyone, Patrick Christie's here.
I'm Michelle Duke, Britain's news channel.
Access the stories that matter to you. Take the GB News family with you on any device. And as long as you have an internet connection. Tune in to GB News, anywhere on the planet or beyond. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Monday, the 7th of July. I'm Tom Hull.
And I'm Emily Carver.
Now, 20 years ago today...
We really don't know at the moment. It's loud bangs. We need ambulances and water to Russell's, to King's Cross. I understand what you're saying.
Yes, 20 years since the 7/7 attacks that killed 52 people and injured over 700. But 2 decades on, is Britain really any safer?
Well, it was a tumultuous time, and today bereaved families, survivors, members of the emergency services and prime ministers, past and present, gathered here to remember those who lost their lives.
Elsewhere, is there another Labour rebellion brewing? Sir Keir Starmer faces fresh fury from his own MPs, this time over support for special needs children. With no guarantee of legal rights for vulnerable pupils, could this be welfare reform part 2?
Another battle for Sir Keir Starmer with his own backbenchers looms this autumn, with their fears over plans to cut support for SEND children. What will the government do, and how serious will it be for so many children in need of care?
Elsewhere, the mushroom murder mystery that shocked Australia and the world. A mum found guilty of killing her in-laws with a poisoned beef Wellington. Sounds like something out of fiction, but what drove Erin Patterson to plan this deadly lunch?
And an Islamic charity faces sanctions. One trustee banned after a GBNews expose revealed he gave a speech about violence against Jews days after the Hamas attacks. Should the incident be taken more seriously, though?
And calls for police action over a controversial column which joked about nuking both Glastonbury and Brighton. Well, it was branded satire by the author. I think it was clearly satirical. But the council leader at Brighton has called it an incitement to violence.
Good grief. I mean, it was a beautiful memorial service for the 7/7 bombings 20 years ago today. Shocked the country and further afield, I'm sure, to see something happen like that, so coordinated in our capital city, such a loss of life. But I do wonder, it does make you think, are our politicians keeping us safe with some of the decisions that they make? We know Islamism is a massive threat. Keir Starmer didn't mention that in his statement. You could say, well, you know, he wants to focus on the victims rather than potentially the perpetrators. King Charles also didn't mention the Islamist threat. And I do wonder, when you've got warnings from authorities, from people in the know, that perhaps some Islamists might want to exploit that route across the Channel that currently is completely open, it seems, that perhaps our politicians need to do some actually more than, you know, turn up to these memorial services, say how awful it is and how we're all united, when actually they're potentially making the threat far bigger.
Well, it's worth noting that the 7/7 attackers were born and bred in Britain.
That's even more scary, though, isn't it?
But there were further attackers who were... So, for example, the Parsons Green attack, which we don't talk about much because the bomb sort of only half went off.
Yeah.
People were injured but not killed. That was in 2017 on a district line train in London. Very similar to what the 7/7 bombings were, but obviously didn't go according to plan. That was done by an Iraqi asylum seeker. And it does seem that, of course, there is a... You can't deny the link between radical Islam and a higher regard for foreign conflicts. I mean, a lot of people say that the 7/7 bombings were something to do with the Iraq War, and then people say that further bombings, 2017 bombings, were all to do with perhaps how Britain responds to terrorism, or they always throw in sort of something to do with Israel there too. And it's worth asking the question about where people's priorities lie.
Yeah, we've got people growing up in this country, unfortunately, who hate this country and who are more than willing to indulge in Islamist, extremist materials, being pushed by people who know exactly what they're doing, and then to have, you know, a Channel migrant crisis as well from very dangerous parts of the world where, unfortunately, there is high levels of Islamism and that ideology is very much there. You know, two and two together Are we heading for more of this kind of thing? I hope not, but I'd like it if our politicians actually, you know, acted on our behalf rather than spoke necessarily about how nice and unified we all are.
Well, do get involved in the comments section. gbnews.com/your say is the way to get involved. All to come after your latest news headlines with Sophia.
Tom, thank you. Very good afternoon. It's 5 minutes past 2. These are your latest headlines. Top story today, a memorial service has taken place at St Paul's Cathedral for the victims of the July 7th bombings. King Charles has called on the nation to remember the extraordinary courage and compassion 2 decades after London's deadliest terror attack. 52 people were killed and hundreds injured when suicide bombers struck 3 tubes, trains and a bus. Sir Keir Starmer and Sir Sadiq Khan both laid wreaths this morning in remembrance of the bombing's victims. Mayor of London, Sir Sadiq Khan, spoke earlier about the spirit of Londoners.
What we did see, though, was some remarkable acts of kindness, of bravery. It's a reminder that actually London stood together. And we've got to remind ourselves that what these terrorists seek to do is to drive a wedge between different communities. They seek to sow division and hatred. And London stood united, not just against the terrorists, but united supporting each other.
Sir Keir Starmer is facing a fresh backbench revolt over controversial plans to overhaul special needs education. There are reports that ministers are poised to scrap the system, which ensures pupils with special needs, such as autism and ADHD, get personalised support whilst at school, currently costing the taxpayer £12 billion a year. Senior party figures warn the reforms risk becoming welfare Mark II, as the government faces mounting pressure to balance the books on public finances. Meanwhile, specialist nursery teachers in disadvantaged areas will be offered £4,500 cash incentives to boost early years education. The new scheme, part of the government's Best Start in Life strategy, will also see Ofsted inspect all new providers within 18 months of opening from next April onwards. The Education Secretary says the plan aims to ensure every child gets the foundation they need to succeed, regardless of their background. Minister for Early Years, Stephen Morgan, told GB News he wants to ensure the system is fit for the future.
I talk to parents all the time, obviously in my own constituency, on visits that I do and those that write to me, and they would agree that the system just isn't working at the moment. And our priority is to get it right at the right place for every child. We've put more money in to send. We put £1 billion in high needs funding in last year. We've put more money in for what capital, so more places in mainstream settings as well. Our Best Start centres, there will be dedicated professionals in those centres to support children with SEND. So the money's going in, the investment's going in, and we want to deliver the reform to make sure the system is fit for the future.
Donald Trump is threatening extra tariffs on countries backing BRICS policies he sees as anti-American. The US president says any nation aligning with the economic agenda of the BRICS alliance, made up of Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, will face an additional 10% tariff, with no exceptions. His post on Truth Social came shortly after BRICS leaders issued a joint statement warning that rising tariffs were threatening global trade. It comes as President Trump's administration is racing to finalise a string of new trade deals before a July 9th deadline. Meanwhile, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is heading back to Washington today to meet with Donald Trump to discuss a potential ceasefire for Gaza. And the annual Festival of San Fermin kicks off today with the first running of the bulls. Hundreds of runners dressed in the traditional white and red outfits sprinted ahead of the powerful animals along the 875-metre route. Emergency services reported that 6 people were taken to hospital with injuries to their arms and legs, but none were gored during the run. Tourists travelling from all over the world to run alongside the locals over the next 7 days makes this event one of the most famous across Spain in the summer months. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. More from me in just under half an hour. But first, let's check in on the markets.
My Claim Group sponsors the GB News Finance Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of the markets this afternoon. The pound will buy you $1.362 and €1.161. The price of gold is £2,432.93 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 8,824 points.
My Claim Group sponsors the GB News Finance Report.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 9 minutes past 2, and it's 20 years today since the devastating terrorist attacks on the London transport system.
Yes, 52 people died, almost 800 injured. 4 terrorists detonated bombs on the London Underground and on a double-decker bus.
Well, our Home and Security editor Mark White takes a personal look back at the tragedy he lived through and reported on, an atrocity that marked the first use of suicide bombings in the United Kingdom.
Something's gone badly wrong. We really don't know at the moment. It's loud bangs. We need ambulances and water to King's Cross.
I understand what you're saying.
And Russell Square.
Russell Square is we're going to have it as a major incident, so we'll get ambulances to you wherever I can.
Okay, thanks, mate. Code down to the home.
An attack in the heart of our capital city. The London bombings were designed to strike commuters at the height of rush hour. 3 underground trains and a bus were the targets. But as shocking as this mass casualty attack was, it also marked a sinister turn in the threat Britain now faced. The first suicide bombings in this country. So many people here in London and far beyond have stories to tell about the horrors of 7/7. For me, it was quite literally the day Islamist terrorism landed on my doorstep. Around the time of 7/7, I was living in this apartment block. That iconic red double-decker bus blew up just yards further up the road there. And Russell Square, another blast site, is just across the road. It was a Piccadilly line train between King's Cross and Russell Square which saw the greatest loss of life. 26 died here.
I'm the supervisor at Aldgate. We've just had a big explosion. There appears to be something ahead of the train in the track.
But maybe fatalities. We don't know anything about that.
Another 7 were killed near Aldgate Station in East London. 6 died at Edgware Road Station in West London. And 13 lost their lives when a double-decker bus was blown up at Tavistock Square, just yards from the site of the blast at Russell Square. Russell Square was my local tube station. On 7/7, I was fortunate to be on a day off. Otherwise, around the time of the bombing, I'd have been right here trying to catch a westbound Piccadilly line train. So many of us feel fortunate that fate intervened that day. But as well as the 52 who died, almost 800 were injured, and thousands of others will never forget what they saw. I ended up reporting live from the roof of my apartment building as the full horror of those events unfolded.
Looking down onto Russell Square, high up on a rooftop here, looking down onto Russell Square tube station at the moment. There's a row of about 20 ambulances immediately outside the tube station. Also, fire rescue vehicles, firefighters are down in Russell Square tube station itself. There are numerous, what are obviously doctors in these familiar orange boiler suits as well, either going down into the tunnel or emerging with casualties.
Those were murderous attacks on London, on our city, that affected so many people so deeply. I think it's really important 20 years on that our focus is on all of those people affected. The other thing my mind turns to are the emergency services and others who stepped forward on that day, and they and the families and the victims. What strikes me is how they're still carrying the effects of that day through to today and for the rest of their lives.
As well as the first suicide bombings, 7/7 marked the advent for the UK of more sophisticated terror cells aimed at causing so-called spectacular attacks. 2 decades on, the UK's most senior counter-terrorism officer says the threat picture has mostly moved away from the more sophisticated plots to an era of lone wolf attacks, individuals still willing to die for their twisted ideology and still looking to cause maximum harm.
So we still see the Islamist threat as our main threat here in the United Kingdom. With an ever-increasing and unstable world as well, we do see terrorist groups overseas beginning to have an influence on terrorism threats in near Europe and of course here in the UK. So Islamist remains our main threat. And I think the online environment, the world environment, adds a whole new layer of challenge to the threat that we face.
I know it sounds a bit like a cliche, but I honestly can't believe that 20 years have passed since the horrors of the London bombings, a day when the 52 innocent lives represented here were so murderously cut short, and the lives of so many others forever changed. Mark White, GB News at the 7/7 Memorial.
Well, delighted to say that joining us now is Mark White, our Home and Security Editor, who of course authored that report for us. But Mark, a hugely significant day. I think the big question everyone will be asking is, are we any safer today? Could something like this happen again?
Sadly, we're not any safer today. We have kind of ebbs and flows in terms of the sort of terror threat to the UK. We went through a period, obviously, in the aftermath of 2005, where the threat from Al-Qaeda was very significant indeed. We saw a number of plots. We saw a copycat, of course, just a couple of weeks after the 7/7 bombings, that thankfully the bombs didn't detonate fully. So there was no loss of life or any injuries involved in that particular set of attempted bombings. But we had other plots that were carried out, like sort of the airline plot, an audacious plot to try and bring down airliners from the UK to the US, looking to use liquid bombs. That's why ever since, until very recently, we've had these restrictions on liquids that you can take on airliners, all really stemming from that particular period under Al-Qaeda. But Al-Qaeda was obviously dealt with to an extent by the coalition forces led by the George Bush administration at that time, that went after Al-Qaeda in the likes of Afghanistan, Iraq and other places in the Middle East and South Asia, and it was largely dismantled. It has, though, now been regrouping and regrowing, and it is really becoming quite a significant force once again. We also got, after Al-Qaeda, in the period where Al-Qaeda was diminished greatly, the rise of another terrorist organisation, ISIS. That really arose out of the remnants of the country Iraq and the Iraq War, and the Ba'athist supporters there of the previous sort of Saddam Hussein regime. And we saw the rise then of ISIS, which caused very significant terrorist attacks in the UK as well. You were talking before about Parsons Green, Tom. In that period of 2017, a number of other terrorist attacks, including the Westminster Bridge and Houses of Parliament attack, the London Bridge and Borough Market attacks, also, of course, that horrific attack at the Ariana Grande concert up in Manchester, all tied back to ISIS as well. ISIS has been diminished, but we're now told by the police and security services that it is also on the rise once more. So that's to get to the point of, are we any safer? Sadly, we're not, because you've those two terrorist organisations on the rise again, looking to commit terrorist attacks, and ISIS certainly have done already in the continent, in France and particularly Germany in recent months. There were 250 almost terrorist arrests in the UK last year. That's at a 5-year high. So some real concern about where we're headed, especially when you take into consideration what has been happening in Gaza, in Iran, elsewhere in the Middle East, that's fueling those jihadis and their determination to reap death and destruction in the West.
OK, well, Mark White, thank you very much indeed, our Home and Security Editor there outside St Paul's Cathedral, where there was a memorial service a little bit earlier in the day. But we're going to turn to politics, because it may not be a good day for Sir Keir Starmer, because he's facing a fresh Labour revolt, potentially, this time over controversial plans to overhaul special needs education.
Well, ministers might scrap the system guaranteeing tailored support for pupils with autism or ADHD, individual plans that can involve anything from being sent to a special school, getting a dedicated teaching assistant, or even getting taxis to and from school paid for by the taxpayer.
But senior Labour figures warn this could become welfare Mark II. The rebellion over the welfare bill, could there be another rebellion over special needs children? Well, millions of children are at risk of losing this support. But let's get to Christopher Hope, because he's our political editor and he's there in Westminster for us, hearing about this. Do we have any more detail, Christopher?
Hi, Tom. Hi, Emily. No, we don't. This is a battle for the autumn, not for now. But the context is that issue last week when the government holed out its universal and personal independent payment bill. In fact, in dropping the name PIP from the bill because the changes there, the £5 billion worth of savings, they've been dropped altogether, leaving a £5 billion hole in the government's accounts. This is a different issue altogether. There's around 600,000 children who have these reports, these education, health and care plans. The government's looking at how those are developed, how they're drawn up. Around three-quarters of those have issues like autism, social, emotional, mental health issues, severe learning needs, but physical needs is about a quarter. That's gone up. The number of children receiving has gone up by a lot over since 2018, doubles in 2018, 11% rise in January, increasingly soaking up a big part of the £12 billion special needs budget. The government is reviewing this. Now, they're at great pains to tell us in a briefing with the PM spokesman moments ago that they understand that parents are fighting for their children. These are legally enforceable plans when they're established. There are tribunals to go through, 24,000 last year. They want to get this right and make sure that the right care is going to the right people. Of course, those on the left of the Labour Party, particularly in the Parliamentary Labour Party, they see a cut coming. They're concerned whether these areas might be cut, and that's what they're concerned about. So a rebellion is looming, the next battleground, if you like, but not till the autumn.
I mean, it is extraordinary to look at the budget. It's risen by 50% just in the last 3 or 4 years. Since 2021-22, it stood at £8 billion. It's now at £12 billion. That's a £4 billion increase. Utterly astonishing numbers. I mean, I don't think the number of disabled children has risen by 50%, but clearly there are some marginal cases. Maybe we've set the threshold too low, but it's so hard for the government to actually get through its agenda now. And I suppose this is the real part of the story. Even sort of sensible rationalising reforms that would just keep standards at a level they are today seem near impossible for this government to pass.
Tom, that's so right. I think it comes down to trust, because as much as the government says they understand that the stress on parents, they say that we're determined to get this right, many of the party's MPs, after last week's behaviour when they removed elements of these benefit reforms, there's not much trust now between the party's base and Number 10. And earlier, Pat McFadden, he's the Cabinet Office Minister, he tried to set out the case for the government.
The SEND system is really important, and people have been expressing concerns about it for some time. Anything we do will have one thing at its heart, which is to get the best outcome for the children, and that will drive any programme of change on SEND.
There you have it, the best outcome for the children from Pat McFadden. That battle will run and run through the summer. And just while I've got you both, do be aware, President Emmanuel Macron, is in London this week, starting tomorrow through to Thursday. And we know, aside from the meetings with the PM's team, of course, as you might expect, and ministers, he's meeting with opposition leaders too, Kevin Badenoch, the Tory party leader, Sir Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, but not with Nigel Farage. Now, Nigel Farage's party, Reform UK, has just 4 MPs. It's the 6th biggest grouping of MPs in the House of Commons, and yet he's so far ahead in the polls, you might wonder why they can't get together, but they're not. So already there's talk online of a snub for Farage.
Well, it does look like a bit of a snub. Christopher Hope, thank you very much indeed, our political editor there from the Westminster studio. Now it's the Great British Giveaway, £54,321. Here's how to enter.
you have the chance to win our biggest cash prize to date in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. As there's an incredible £54,321 in tax-free cash to be won. What would you spend it on? A brand new car, the holiday of a lifetime, or just the chance to sit back, relax and remove some of those day-to-day financial stresses? £54,321 in tax-free cash has to be won. For another chance to win £54,321 cash, text cash to 63225. One entry costs £2.50 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63225. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start at £2.50. Call 0903 686 3232. Calls cost £2.50 plus your network access charge, or post your name and number to GB14 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 4 p.m. on the 1st of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
From the school run to the home run, watch a new show for all of Britain.
So he can say whatever he wants.
A straight talking show where all voices are heard.
And, you know, when are we going to stop talking about smashing the gangs and actually do it?
With the stories that matter from every part of our country.
There's a bit of a crash landing there for your Chancellor.
Bold, fearless and standing up for you. That's me, Martin Daubney, 3 p.m. till 6 p.m, weekdays, here only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster's full of talk, but out here, it's the real world.
Am I allowed to talk then?
No, that's it. This is where it matters, real people and real lives. That's what politics is all about.
In fact, has Trump made a good start? No.
Straight answers, no spin, and just a couple of pints.
How many fingers have I got up?
About 10. So join me for Lee Anderson's Real World every Friday at 7 p.m, only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You want to know what's really going on in the corridors of power? Labour don't know what to do with you half the time, and that makes you quite lethal in the chamber. Get behind the headlines with Chopper's Political Podcast. Join me, Christopher Hope, as I sit down with the great and the good of British politics. We'll see where this ruling takes us. These are the stories shaping our nation. Chopper's Political Podcast, available now on all platforms. Listen in and stay ahead.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 28 minutes past 2. Now, delivery drivers claim that a recent influx of illegal immigrants into the sector has seriously undercut their wages, with some legitimate drivers reportedly getting as little as £2.60 per job.
Yes, so the government has recently called on courier platforms such as Just Eat and Deliveroo to improve their vetting systems for drivers because there are so many illegal immigrants allegedly taking up these jobs. But an investigation by the Express newspaper found that illegal workers are still finding ways to bypass identity checks.
Well, let's get the thoughts of the former Immigration Minister, Kevin Foster. Kevin, it does seem like this is a problem that is not going away. I mean, ultimately, how is it even possible to enforce an identity check when someone could just use someone else's ID? I mean, unless we have police officers on every street corner stopping people on motorcycles and forcing them to take off their helmets, I mean, it's just not going to happen, is it?
Well, Tom, there is certainly technology that the firms could be using. If we just think of our own banking apps, where virtually any transaction you can be asked to show your face, i.e. your biometrics, to the app. It doesn't strike me as impossible for some of these delivery firms to look at, for example, if you accept a job, a quick scan of your face in the way when you look at your phone to unlock it. That technology is readily available. And I think the government needs to question why that isn't now being used. I noticed some of the reports are that, for example, it requires a daily scan. Well, we wouldn't accept that for our banking app, would we? That, as long as your face is scanned once in the day, you could then make lots of transactions on it. So exactly the same should be on these types of apps. And I suspect it's the companies dragging their feet because at the end of the day, this bountiful suppliers, they would see it of cheap labour who are happy to work for below
Kevin,
the
that should be the bare minimum.
Sorry,
Kevin, but that should be the bare minimum, shouldn't it? Face ID, every job you have, safety of people who are receiving the items from Uber Eats, Delivery, whatever it is, and also to try and prevent illegal immigrants from taking these jobs to begin with. But do we need to go a step further and say to the likes of Uber Eats, say to the likes of Deliveroo and Just Eat or whatever, we're not going to let you do your business in this country until you can tell us that you have done absolutely everything you can to prevent illegal immigrants from using your app and exploiting the use of your app in this way?
Emily, absolutely. We should set minimum standards. And also, by the way, not just illegal migrants. This is an opportunity for those who have criminal records where really you would not want them delivering stuff to your house to potentially.
No, but Kevin,
would
you put a pause on there? Would you put a pause on them actually doing business in this country? So say, you know what, you're not going to be allowed to even, have your Deliveroo until you can confirm to us that there are no illegal migrants working on your app.
Well, I think, Emily, it would be perfectly reasonable to say to these companies, you've had long enough to implement the type of biometrics virtually every bank's been using for years and is readily available and is used by every smartphone, even when it just locks itself and you haven't looked at it for a couple of weeks, or a couple of minutes even, rather than a couple of weeks. So I think we could certainly the government could make these types of requirements. They've had plenty of notice and, it's almost become ludicrous that you can go to an asylum hotel, as the Shadow Home Secretary did, and see the bikes piled up. It doesn't take much of an investigation to see what's going on.
Yeah, I suppose that there are going to be some questions in terms of the deliverability of this. I understand, face biometrics are to do with the smartphone rather than the individual app concerned. I mean, I suppose you could find a way to get around that by just linking your face to your phone and pretending that that's someone else's phone, if you see what I mean. There do seem to be perhaps more difficult technological challenges. And what I want to get to here is really, are we at risk of outsourcing border control to technology startups? Because surely this wouldn't be a problem had we just got control of our borders. Had the government got a grip on illegal immigration, we wouldn't need to be talking about this extra regulation for some successful companies.
Well, Tom, I wouldn't agree with the idea that it's purely about smartphones. Apps, and as we said, bank phones use it. Bank apps use it. The biometric checks very regularly. Yeah, of course. If the core of this is actually not having for tens of thousands of people who've entered the country illegally, sat around waiting for decisions, and actually starting to remove some of them, and it's ending this flow of cheap labour for this app. But even without that particular challenge, you would have the issue of, for example, someone with a criminal record who you'd rather was not popping around your house to deliver your takeaway, potentially pretending to using someone else's account by lack of verification. And again, this is technology that is really quite simple and is used by virtually every transactional app going.
Yeah, and it's I mean, you know, the benefit is for these companies because they can just pay their workers far less because they've got an abundance of potentially illegal migrants to work for them. But Kevin Foster, thank you very much indeed, former Immigration Minister. Of course, I'm sure they'd deny that, but there you go.
Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Plenty more to come on today's programme, including this. An Islamic charity faces sanctions and one trustee is banned after a GB News expose revealed he gave a speech about violence against Jews days after the Hamas attacks. But should this incident be taken more seriously? First, the news with Sophia.
Good afternoon. The headlines just after 2:30. Memorial service has taken place today at St Paul's Cathedral for the victims of the July 7th bombing. Families of victims, first responders, police and other transport staff on duty on the day in 2005 were all in attendance. Sir Keir Starmer is facing a fresh backbench revolt over controversial plans to overhaul special needs education, scrapping the system which ensures pupils with special needs such as autism and ADHD get personalised support at school. Specialist nursery teachers in disadvantaged areas will be offered £4,500 cash incentives to boost early years education. That's part of the government's Best Start in Life strategy. President Donald Trump is threatening extra tariffs, saying any nation aligning with the economic agenda of the BRICS will face an additional 10% tariff with no exceptions. Erin Patterson has been found guilty in Australia of serving a toxic death cap mushroom in a home-cooked beef Wellington that killed 3 members of her family. The annual Festival of San Fermin kicks off today with the first running of the bulls. Hundreds of runners dressed in the traditional white and red outfits sprinted ahead of the powerful animals along the 875-metre route, with just 6 being taken to hospital. Those are the headlines for now. More news at the top of the hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. We do have some showers moving across the UK today, but through the day it's going to turn drier and brighter for many of us. Sunny spells, particularly in the west, but heavy downpours, particularly in the east, especially as we end the day and go overnight. There will be some thunderstorms here and there. But showers will continue for the afternoon across central and western Scotland, 1 or 2 running into North Wales, through the Midlands and eastern England. A lot of cloud in these areas. The best of the sunshine across Wales and the southwest, where it will feel cool, but with temperatures at around 23, 24 Celsius, pleasant enough in any sunny spells. The cool breeze continues through the evening, and that will send some further showers into Northern Ireland, central and southern Scotland. Brighter skies arriving into northern Scotland as we end the day. But you can see some intense showers starting to develop at this stage through northern England and the east of England. Some thundery downpours, some lightning flashes as well associated with these. And I think they'll blossom into this area of more persistent rain as the evening progresses, running down the eastern side of the country, pushing into East Anglia, for example, by midnight. That then moves through and drier, clearer weather returns to the vast majority. And under those clear skies, it's going to be a cool night, so a lot more comfortable for sleeping, I think, compared with many nights so far this summer. And then we start off with plenty of sunshine Tuesday morning. In fact, it's a beautiful start to the day for many of us, but a brisk wind blows through the east coast and there'll be further showers here for a time. And there'll be some thicker cloud returning to western Scotland and Northern Ireland, along with some outbreaks of rain. In between, long spells of sunshine and feeling warmer. In fact, it's going to warm up further this week with temperatures into the high 20s, low 30s by the weekend.
Crash Law 24 sponsors GB News Traffic and Travel Report.
Good afternoon. This is the latest AI travel news from gbnews.com. Road users at the Dornoch Bridge on the A9 should exercise caution due to strong winds. The M4 eastbound remains closed between junctions 28 at Tredegar Park and 24 at Coldra, with diversions due to ongoing roadworks. In Stockport, all lanes are closed on the M60 clockwise at junction 26 due to an incident. In Staffordshire, a collision on the M6 southbound between junctions 16 and 15 has led to 2 of 3 lanes being closed, causing significant delays. And on the trains, Avanti West Coast and cross-country services are experiencing disruptions at Birmingham New Street. For more travel news, go to gbnews.com.
Crash Law 24 sponsors GB News Traffic and Travel Report.
OK, good afternoon, Britain. It's 2:39 in the afternoon. Now, an Islamic charity has been given an official warning and had one of its trustees banned after GB News exposed footage of him making a speech about violence against Jews just days after the Hamas attacks in 2023.
Yes, Harun Abdur-Rashid Holmes, who preached at the Nottingham Islam Information Point, has been sanctioned by the Charity Commission after a 20-month investigation. OK, well, joining us now is litigation lawyer Mahtab Aziz. Mahtab, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Does this go far enough, then? Just a sanction from the Charity Commission, what do you think?
Right, well, I think the Charities Commission was obviously only acting within its ambit of charity law and decided that this particular charity had, not really adhered to the principles and the rules that govern a charity. So they look strictly at the charity laws for that particular sanction.
It is interesting to look at precisely what's going on here, because I suppose the defence from this man was that he was quoting what is written in the hadiths. And to many Muslims, the hadiths are the absolute, true sort of word of the Prophet Muhammad, and he quoted, word for word, the Garquad tree hadith, which does talk about how Muslims will fight against the Jews and Muslims will kill them until the Jews would hide themselves behind a stone or a tree, and a stone or tree would say, Muslim, as the servant of Allah, there is a Jew behind me, behind him, come and kill him. I mean, that is the Garquad tree hadith. I suppose there's a difficulty here in terms of regulations. If Muslims believe this is sort of representing the word of Muhammad, are we saying that that is not allowed to be preached?
Well, I have to correct you there, actually, because this Mr. Holmes, in fact, did a great disservice to his role as an imam, because he got it completely wrong. The hadith does not say that. He took it completely out of context. That particular part of the hadith, which is from Al-Bukhari, in fact refers to apocalyptic times. Yes. As Christians, Muslims also believe that Jesus will return. And in fact, they were talking about that time, and they were talking about the followers who were against Jesus. And they were the ones who would actually be, fighting the Muslims, because the Muslims would be actually on the side of Jesus. That's the actual context.
Without wanting to get into too much of a theological debate, this does talk about how to bring about the Day of Judgment, is the translation I have before me. The Day of Judgment will not come about until Muslims fight the Jews. So I suppose you could interpret that as you must wage holy war against the Jews to bring about the Judgment Day.
No, it's not correct, because it's only referring to the specific followers of the Antichrist, not all Jews. That's quite clear. So the Imam, unfortunately, did a very great disservice to his position by completely misquoting that, and that was wrong.
OK, yes, well, he did say that there should have been more context provided. But do you think this type of speech should reach the criminal threshold? We've had, we have hate speech in this country. This could be seen as inciting violence, potentially. Do you think there's a criminal? Do you think this might reach a criminal threshold?
Oh, well, potentially it can do, but the Charities Commission are rather loath to actually report people for crimes. They're only concerned with, making sure that charities adhere to the rules and regulations of the Charities Commission. That would be something that they would not normally do.
I mean, it does seem strange because, of course, the words that are written in that hadith even if the context is sort of there before it, are Muslim or servant of Allah, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him. I mean, that's very, very clear. That's written down. And there is no criminal sort of sanction against someone for saying that, for reading that out. And yet, in recent years, there have been arrests for Christian preachers preaching Old Testament passages that are seen to be anti-gay or whatever else it is. I mean, I've got before me just 4 arrests of various Christians who were arrested after preaching words that were written in the Bible, and people complained because they deemed it as homophobic or anything else. And I wonder, is there an argument that there's a double standard here? Christian preachers, the police are happy to go and arrest them for saying stuff that's in the Bible, but then everyone sort of tiptoes around a Muslim preacher saying something that's written in a hadith, and there's no criminal sanction.
Sure. Well, I'm going to just mention a couple of points. Firstly, the hadith, as you probably realise or know, is not a part of the Quran, not a part of the Holy Book. These are separate writings which are supposed to be sayings, of the Prophet, and they do not hold the same level of adherence and reverence as the Quran. That's the first thing. Secondly, this particular hadith was actually speaking about the future, something which had not actually had happened yet, or was it current? So this was really a prediction. So even though it was still wrong, in the way that the actual Mr. Holmes had actually relayed it to his congregation, he shouldn't have said it. That was completely wrong.
Yeah.
So, but otherwise, generally speaking, if that was to be said in those very terms, yes, it would probably reach the threshold of criminality.
OK, well, Mahtab Aziz, thank you very much indeed for your time this afternoon. Litigation lawyer there, Mahtab Aziz. Yes, it's true, isn't it? You have Christian preachers who say something that's homophobic, deemed homophobic out in the public. Yeah. Well, police, coppers come straight over, don't they? Yeah. We've contacted the charity for comment, so we'll let you know if they come back to us.
But I do think that is an important point to raise. I mean,
the context straight after the Hamas attack.
When you're basing your entire morality off a book or a passage or a saying that was written hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago, in a completely different time, in a fractious time of warlords and everything else, there's going to be quite a lot of nasty stuff in there. Yeah. And there is quite a lot of nasty stuff.
Yeah, is it a matter of free speech? Well, if you're in search of some holiday sun, here's the forecast.
You're looking happy.
Well, the forecast looks good.
So you've sorted the travel insurance then?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
The heat wave across Europe is increasingly becoming confined to eastern areas of the country. Temperatures here could locally still be 5-10 degrees above normal for the year. On the edge of that heat, though, there are some heavy thunderstorms breaking out for the Balkans and over the Alps. Generally further towards the west, though, temperatures now easing back towards average, but northerly winds bringing a touch of cloud to parts of Iberia, as well as Madeira and Tenerife. Generally, though, for many areas over the next few days, there will be a lot of sunshine around.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
You want to know what's really going on in the corridors of power? Labour don't know what to do with you half the time, and that makes you quite lethal in the chamber. Get behind the headlines with Chopper's Political Podcast. Join me, Christopher Hope, as I sit down with the great and the good of British politics. We'll see where this ruling takes us. These are the stories shaping our nation. Chopper's Political Podcast, available now on all platforms. Listen in and stay ahead.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
5 hosts, 5 opinions, 5 fearless debates,
5 unfiltered takes on the day's news.
5 reasons not to be anywhere else on Saturday night.
This is the Saturday Five.
You got me good there.
Britain's biggest Saturday night TV show.
It's not a bad brand.
Yeah. Uncensored.
Very, very racy tonight.
On the unpredictable.
What does she say? Can you translate it for us?
And always entertaining.
And how can a country go from being led by William Wallace
Saturday nights from 6 p.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
You're going to want to stay tuned, trust me.
At GB News, we love to hear from you, our loyal community. So drop us a line at gbnews.com/yoursay. There you can talk to each other and also to the presenters live on air. gbnews.com/yoursay, because GB News is your channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's coming up to 10 to 3. Now, a courtroom drama that gripped Australia has ended with a chilling verdict.
Yes, Erin Patterson, the mum accused of lacing beef Wellington with deadly mushrooms, has been found guilty of murdering her in-laws.
With bizarre twists, lies and one miraculous survivor, this is the story of a poisonous plot that shocked the world.
It started as a quiet country lunch and ended in one of the most chilling murder cases in modern Australian history. On July the 29th, 2023, Erin Patterson hosted a meal at her home in Victoria, serving beef Wellington to 4 of her relatives. Her former in-laws, Don and Gail Patterson, and Gail's sister Heather, and her husband, Ian Wilkinson. Within days, 3 of the guests were dead. Ian Wilkinson, a local pastor, was taken to hospital in a critical condition. But Erin, who hosted the lunch, was the only one who didn't fall ill, and later claimed it was a tragic accident. But this year, a jury found Erin guilty of 3 counts of murder and 1 of attempted murder, concluding she'd laced the meal with deadly death-cap mushrooms. Prosecutors said Erin had lied to lure her guests in, even claiming she had cancer. She allegedly mixed wild mushrooms, foraged in areas she'd researched online, into the dish, then served it on different plates, even preparing a proportion for her estranged husband Simon, who pulled out of the lunch last minute. After the lunch, CCTV showed Erin dumping a food dehydrator containing traces of the poisonous mushroom. Her phone had been wiped and she couldn't recall where she'd bought these mushrooms. Digital evidence recovered from deleted files and social media revealed photos of mushrooms on scales and posts about secretly feeding them to her kids in brownies. The defence argued Erin had simply made a mistake, confusing foraged mushrooms with the store-bought ones, and panicked. But the jury didn't buy it. They found the lies too numerous, the evidence too deliberate, and the motive, while murky, suggestive of deep resentment. Now convicted, Erin Patterson faces life in prison and leaves a community still asking, why did she do it? She'll return to court soon for sentencing.
Well, a fantastic summary of events there, really. An absolutely wild story, convicted rightly, clearly, of the crime. And, yeah.
Astonishing.
Astonishing in every way.
The sort of thing you'd read about in antiquity. It's what Roman emperors used to do to one another, or people who wanted to be the next emperor and getting rid of various challenges to the succession of one. You always hear about ancient poisonings. You very rarely hear about modern poisonings. It's not the sort of choice of execution method these days, really. That's more Novichok or plutonium or something more novel. But I don't know. I think maybe that's why it's been so internationally sort of jumped upon as a story.
Just the evidence,
the intrigue, the evidence, but also the peculiar method of execution.
The evidence, the denial, the posts, the internet searches. I mean, and she continues to deny. Continues to deny it, despite being the sole survivor.
I was convinced that there was maybe something to gain financially or something, but it turns out no.
She just hated them.
She just really, really hated them.
Quite extraordinary. Sorry to those who lost their lives, obviously. Well, thank you for watching. This was Good Afternoon Britain. We'll be back tomorrow, but it is Martin Daubney up next. Martin.
Fantastic show, guys. And, of course, I'll be continuing the heartfelt tributes. 20 years on to 7/7, we'll have a royal tribute from Prince William. Also, Macron has snubbed Nigel Farage. The visit begins tomorrow. Is it sour grapes from the French president who won't be meeting the grand fromage of Brexit? Plus, for the first time a week tomorrow, they'll finally be publishing data showing the nationality of foreign claimants for benefits. We'll bring you the full inside story and the scandal that's about to erupt. This is simply too big to ignore. That's all 3 till 6, but first is your magnificent weather.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. It's fine for many of us today, particularly towards the west and the southwest, but a cool breeze continues to bring some heavy showers from the north-northwest as low pressure pulls away. And in fact, overnight there's likely to be some heavier, more persistent rain into the north and the east, even some thunderstorms in places, but they'll largely avoid parts of Wales and the southwest, where we keep clear skies into the evening. But this area of showers running southwards, heavy across eastern England with some thunderstorms associated with it. So perhaps a lively evening and first part of the night for the east of England. But by dawn, many places are clear once again. A fresh start to Tuesday, but a sunny start for the vast majority. Plenty of sunshine, certainly inland across Scotland. We've got some areas of cloud into Orkney, into Caithness, Aberdeenshire, for example. Also the Western Isles, but inland actually plenty of sunshine, 11 or 12 degrees at 7 a.m, so feeling pleasant enough. Now, for Northern Ireland, there will be some bright skies first thing, but it's going to turn cloudier here, and there's some patchy cloud into West Wales and southwest England. Also, further showers running down the North Sea into parts of East Anglia, particularly Norfolk and Suffolk. They'll tend to taper off by the time we get to the early afternoon period. And we keep largely dry weather elsewhere across the UK. Plenty of sunshine for many, but thicker cloud arrives into Western Scotland and Northern Ireland, bringing some spots of rain. High teens here, mid-20s possible further south and southeast, so feeling very warm indeed with the sunshine returning. And with winds easing as well, we're going to see largely clear and calm conditions overnight for much of England and Wales. I think for Scotland and Northern Ireland, a bit more cloud, some spots of rain. But even that disappears later this week as high pressure builds